Welcome to the 2020 Midwest Energy Policy Series on Energy Economic Development and Infrastructure. The conference will begin in just a few minutes.
Good morning, everyone. For those of you who don't know, my name is Josh Campbell. I'm the Executive Director of the Missouri Energy Initiative, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the second day of the Midwest Energy Policy Series on economic development and infrastructure. For those of you who attended yesterday, welcome back. For those of you here today for the first time, hopefully today's session will be interesting for you as well. In general, I would like to start off thanking those that made this event possible. Obviously, staff, Travis Wood, who many of you have communicated with, our board of directors, and our sponsors. Evergy and Polsinelli as diamond sponsors. Pardon me. Ameren as a gold sponsor. Liberty Utilities and Spire as silver sponsors. And Missourians for a Balanced Energy Future as our conference partner. And our media partners, RTO Insider and Clean Energy Pipeline. I think it goes without saying that trying to transition from an in-person conference like we have had for the last decade and having your sponsorships and you, the audience, continue to engage with us is vitally important. We definitely couldn't do it without them, and appreciate everybody's patience through all of this and willingness to transition. We've seen some positives shifting to virtual. We hope you see those as well. We welcome any feedback that you have on this conference as we look to 2021 and determine our virtual or in-person status, as well as the content and the design. So a few housekeeping items. Apologize if this is duplicative of yesterday, but for those of you in general, please, I ask you to engage the presenters through your Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. There you can type in your questions, and we will make sure that the presenters see those and answer those as best as we can at the end of the session. This webinar is being recorded, and you will have exclusive access to the presentations following this event. You can use your chat box if you experience any technical difficulties, and that makes sure that either Travis and I can help you with that. Also, should you experience any issues with Zoom, do know that this webinar is being live streamed on YouTube, so you can watch it there. Just go to the link. That link was provided to you via the Eventbrite invitation. I'm sure you all know, but today's a packed session, packed day. We kick it off with a great session from the Missouri General Assembly with a Missouri legislative update. We'll follow that up with a regulatory perspective, expanding that a little bit. We're pleased to be able to provide the chairs from the Kansas, Missouri, and Illinois Public Service Commissions. We'll be hearing about the impacts of COVID-19 on Missouri's economy and what what the prospects look for in 2021. We'll follow that up with a Greenbelt Express transmission project update and close out the day with a session on cannabis and its relationship to energy and economic development. And then also, partway through this morning, we will be presenting our first ever Jim Fisher Lifetime Achievement Award. Unfortunately, in 2020, we lost one of our founding board members, Jim Fisher. And in his honor, and as an example of his commitment to the silver buckshot method of energy policy and finding solutions, his commitment to research and development, connecting the technical side and the policy side. This award was designed. We took nominations over the last 2 months, 3 months, and the board voted on who they thought that recipient would be. So we're very honored to be able to present that today. Hopefully you'll be around for that. So first up, we have Representative Travis Fitzwater and Representative Tracy McCreary of the Missouri House of Representatives. They'll be going over what happened during 2020 legislative session and what they see coming up in the upcoming session. Pardon me, I have a frog in my throat this morning. So I think if I'm correct, Representative Fitzwater, you're going first. Is that correct?
Yeah, I can start us off.
Fantastic. Well, welcome.
Well, thanks. I'm glad to be here with you all, and always enjoyed talking to your group about energy policy. Obviously, it's a big deal to my district. My district's in mid-Missouri, so in central Missouri, we have a lot of energy issues, but in particular, the nuclear power plant, the only one in the state of Missouri, is right on the border of my district. A lot of the employees in Ameren that work there are constituents of mine. So energy policy is a really big deal to my district. When I originally ran for office and I went knocking on doors, thousands and thousands of doors, the two issues that I heard the most about, one were state employee pay increases, which I have a lot of state employees also in Missouri, and Ameren policy or energy policy, nuclear policy. Where do you stand on nuclear power? Where do you stand on energy infrastructure? Those type of issues. So energy policy has obviously been a big part of my career, my 6 years in the legislature, and have really enjoyed being a part of it. Super complex. I came in knowing nothing about energy policy other than we have a nuclear power plant and I had to fight for it. But have learned a lot and have really been honored to be in the legislature and to eventually become the chair of the Utilities Committee in my last term was really, really neat to be a part of that conversation on a kind of on a grander level. So really have enjoyed that and have enjoyed my career, and being on here with Tracy and I have a really good relationship. You're not going to, the media won't show you Republicans and Democrats can get along. And we certainly have our disagreements, but we've worked together very well. And utility policy is, you're going to have very significant disagreements on many levels. And have certainly had that. We've had our ups and downs. But I think utility policy is one that doesn't require a lot of Republican Democrat persuasion. It just requires understanding the issues and landing on a side. And so that's been kind of something I've appreciated about utilities, at least the last 2 years that I've been there, is as the chair, was just trying to ensure that the conversation is heard on all sides and making decisions going forward based on what the members think the policy is best, and not based on political jabs from the left or right. So that's been, I've really enjoyed serving with Tracy in that capacity. And I don't know if I would need to get into issues yet, because I think Tracy and I kind of wanted to talk through some of the stuff we see coming up, but I think important issues you guys are already covering. Certainly we don't, it's kind of funny, the cannabis policy, it'd be interesting to hear what comes of that, but we don't take much of that on in utilities. But the eminent domain that you guys have coming up, the whole grain belt issue, we've had a pretty significant discussion on that over the years, and and we've attached that to bills and utilities, to Tracy's great dismay many, many times. But we've had that discussion on eminent domain, whether or not these out of state corporations should have the authority to, the same authority as an investor owned utility through the PSC has to gather property to expand their projects. It's a very interesting conversation, but it's very in the weeds. I mean, it's an interesting dynamic to have in the Capitol. So eminent domains is really an interesting conversation. The infrastructure surcharge recovery, ISRIS, I'm sorry, infrastructure recovery surcharge, the ISRIS, is an interesting discussion also. How do you pay for developing the infrastructure going forward? How do you ensure that every little expenditure by a utility doesn't have to go before the PSC to get a huge hearing on for a rate case, but it can be kind of built out over years and then added into rate cases as they're filed. Rate cases are very expensive, so that's kind of been an interesting discussion on ISRIS, because we use that on a number of different power levels, gas, water, things like that. We've had those discussions over the last couple of years, so that's an interesting issue going forward. And then the energy policy in general. Tracy and I joke about the energy plan we try to pass every year. That's certainly on the table, but as far as economic development, it's fascinating the dynamics of the market. The market's just bigger than even Missouri. So like, for instance, solar, what's happening in solar power is very fascinating, because that's just really kind of created its own market. It's, we've kind of, for the most part, we've stayed out of solar. We've obviously given Missouri residents, they've gotten credits for putting solar on their homes, but it's a unique situation in solar, and it's growing significantly. It's a very interesting dynamic going forward. So there's kind of these markets for energy that are really fascinating to me to follow, because it really impacts our state's economy in a significant way, not only for providing energy, but just for tax dollars, for creating the economy we have that's very vibrant in the state of Missouri, even amid COVID. And then, COVID's a whole different discussion. How do we do policy amidst a dynamic that we don't really even understand to this point, even after 9 or 10 or 11 months of kind of being under its authority, the pandemic. So, those are the things that stick out that are hills we're trying to climb, and I think that are important policy going forward.
Thank
Fantastic.
you. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I was going to welcome you as well, Representative McCreary. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Josh, and thank you, Representative Fitzwater, for kicking things off. Like Travis mentioned, I'm on the House Utilities Committee. I'm the ranking minority member. We still don't have our committee assignments for 2021, so fingers crossed I'm still on utilities next year. One of the things that's interesting as I've worked with this organization and looked at the agenda are some of the issues that are important to the work that many of you do. Not all of those bills come through the Utilities Committee, interestingly enough. So for example, things dealing with Grain Belt Express and eminent domain, those are issues that depending what session it is, it's the speaker's prerogative to decide what bills get assigned to which committee. And then, of course, once session gets going, for example, that ban on the use of eminent domain, that bill got put on as an amendment on all kinds of things. So towards the end of session, it seemed like everybody was keeping their eyes open for that. So session gets kicked off. Fingers crossed, everybody stays healthy. The swearing in for the House and the Senate is January 6th of 2021. So in a few weeks, we will be doing something resembling the 2021 session. The big thing last year is, besides the issues that Representative Fitzwater mentioned, is the issue of COVID. Really both physically impacted the work that we were able to do in the legislature, and then of course from a legislative perspective, we had to really switch gears as well. So I anticipate that COVID will be something that not only really truncated our session this year in 2020, but will really have a lingering effect as we move into 2021. So my hope is that the majority party will prioritize things so that if we do end up having to have the building closed down for a couple of weeks here and there because of a COVID outbreak, that at the very least, we're doing things that our constituents, that the people of Missouri want us to do. So, there were several bills dealing with surcharges last year with ISRIS. The bill dealing with with Spire for gas ISRIS, the gas surcharge, did make it across the finish line, but there was another one lingering out there dealing with Missouri American Water. So I anticipate that might be something that comes up in 2021 as well. So my perspective on that is, I'm very concerned. I don't like surcharges. And when I think about my constituents, I represent mid St. Louis County. So I go right down highway I-64, Highway 40, right down the middle of St. Louis County from Olivet all the way out to Chesterfield. So I've got a lot of really big businesses and residential, of course. And I want to make sure that things that we're doing are sensitive to all the bills that people pay, whether they're citizens or businesses. So I'm really, surcharges are something that I'm really not a fan of, but I understand that there are times that we need to have those discussions. So, and Representative Fitzwater is absolutely right. We have had many a disagreement on public policy issues, but I appreciate working with him on this committee because I think he epitomizes how we can disagree on issues, but not be disagreeable with each other. So I just want to thank him for that professionalism.
Fantastic. We do have one question. Jennifer Campbell had asked for a little bit more detail on the eminent domain bill. What are the particular points there that you all discussed and feel were at conflict?
That's a great question, and I won't tell you where Representative McCreary stands on things. We see differently. I'm a Republican, she's a Democrat, so we see differently on some policy, but we agree on a lot of policy as well. I think the eminent domain issue had a number of problems from her perspective, but for me, the real question was, should this out-of-state company be able to go into these heritage farms and take large swaths of their land to provide this power source through the state of Missouri, without really having gone and done the work at the front end of asking the property owners if they'd be willing to sell the property in the first place. And so I think that was probably the catalyst on the Republican side, was to protect farmers, to protect these heritage farms that have been in families, for some of them for over 100 years, that have been passed down from generation to generation. To have a company come in and grab property is not a thrilling idea. There's certainly uses for eminent domain. I don't think we'd all say that we should ban eminent domain across the board, because there's certainly areas where maybe that would be useful. I don't want to give an example because I don't know of any off the top of my head, but we've given investor-owned utilities eminent domain power over the years for their power lines. They've used it for decades. And for this out-of-state company to get the authority to do the same thing that the investor-owned utilities have done for decades really gave a lot of Republicans like myself heartburn, especially when these farmers were coming out very, very opposed to having their land taken in this fashion. So I think that from our perspective, that was why we weren't thrilled with it. Now getting renewable energy across the state would be fascinating, but the project also didn't say that we're going to build these lines and Missouri's getting all the power. That's not how that worked. It was basically you're getting a small percentage of the power after, a big stir was caused. Originally, it was just going to be power lines pushed through the state, and Missouri wasn't going to benefit from any of the power that was going across those lines. I think the Grain Belt saw the organization, the company saw the writing on the wall, and they decided that they were going to sell some of the power within the state and decided to do a small percentage. I think it was 12.5 or 15 or 20%, something like that. They sold to a handful of municipalities across the state. And that helped them, I think, make a case to the PSC that they should have the authority to use eminent domain. But I think a lot of us want to see renewable energy used in the state, but I don't know if getting that done through the use of eminent domain and taking away portions of heritage farms is the best way to do that. And so that was the big hang up from my perspective.
Okay, Representative McCreary?
Yeah, it's a great question. My perspective and my caucus's perspective is that transmission lines are absolutely crucial to society because we need to consume power. So, the transmission lines provide a very valuable public service. And last year, this session was the second year the legislature has tried to undo some of the things that the Public Service Commission spent year after year after year reviewing. And, so I was quite frustrated with the effort to be able to attempt to block one company. So I feel like that what we are trying to do actually is unconstitutional because it's basically targeting one company, one project. And, there are already farms of all shapes and sizes that have transmission lines near their property lines through their property. And this bill and these amendments as put on bills, it doesn't do it. Privately owned companies like Ameren will still be able to build power lines, and utilities all over the state right now already have the ability to build transmission lines and will have the right to do that even if this bill passes. So my concern is that this is targeting one specific company, and I think that we need to be sensitive to many, it's not just a handful of municipalities. There are many communities around the state of Missouri that will benefit from very affordable energy. And some of these are communities that are already struggling financially. So if we can do something to lower the utility bills for folks that are struggling, I think that's the right thing to do.
Well, obviously, it looks like we still have a lot to talk about, and hopefully this afternoon we'll hear a little bit more on how that program or project is being updated, and we'll see where we can go from there. But stay tuned, everyone. I was wondering, are either of you familiar with the issue of securitization, coal fire plant retirement?
I am very nominally. We had Tracy and I were talking about this before we got we started the broadcast, but we did have a bill from, I'm pretty sure it was Representative O'Donnell out of St. Louis. And he's a financial advisor from what I recall. And he kind of has his background in the financial world and military. And he filed a bill, I think it was 2 years ago, that we heard at the very end of session just to give him an initial hearing to try to give him some momentum going into the next session. And then I don't remember hearing much about it this last year. I don't think it was much of a priority. But there was a discussion on how we, at the very end of session in 2019, about securitization of coal plants going forward.
Exactly. The representative's right. I think one of the things I love about this committee is I can imagine that we might have multiple hearings on an issue as complex as securitization. And these are some really big changes in the industry. I can't imagine that would be something that would happen in one or even two sessions, even if it was a priority. So I would say that you and your members who have an interest in this are going to probably be spending, once it becomes, if it were to get on the speaker's radar as a priority, that we should gear up for several sessions of discussion on this pretty complex subject.
And
sorry. Go ahead,
no, it's okay. I think that things are changing so swiftly too, that even though it feels like things are changing in the energy environment so swiftly, with new technologies and solar and nuclear innovations and some of these things that are happening, we also have, it's very slow also. The retiring of coal plants in Missouri isn't going to happen for a while, but we need to have this discussion about how do we securitize those now, so we're not, left with the bag at some point down the road. And I think that's an important conversation to have, but Representative McCreary is exactly right. It's going to take a little bit of time to wade through such a complex issue like that.
Well, and one thing I want to add that applies to the issues that all of you care about, but it applies to anything really, is that because of term limits in the state of Missouri, most of us, even if we serve our full term or full time, we can only serve a max of 8 years in the House and 8 years in the Senate. So for those of you that care about an issue, you really need to be doing planning within your organization to continually be educating people, because there are new people coming in all the time. We have 2 giant classes of new people coming in on January 6th. So, I don't think any of you will ever get to a point where you can say, okay, everybody on this committee understands the issue, because just when you get somebody like me brought up to speed on something, I'm going to term out. So we need you guys to constantly be working.
It's really important now. Yeah, it's a great point, because right now, going in January, going into this new session, over half of the legislature haven't been there for more than 2 years. So in the last 2 classes, we've turned over 50% of the legislature. That's a significant new group of people that need education.
So 2020 definitely not only impacted the economy, people's jobs, how they're working, how they're teaching their kids. It also impacted both of you in the Capitol and how the session went. Any thoughts on how you see 2021 shaping up? Do you see it'll be normal? Any expectations of how the process or engagement with constituents will change?
Wow, it's a mystery. I mean, at this point right now, we're planning to be in the building a lot. For example, my husband's going to be building a spit guard kind of thing to put around my legislative assistant's desk in preparation for people coming and wanting to meet in person. But yeah, I think so much of this is mysterious and is going to really depend on how well we as Missourians decide that we're going to, take this virus seriously. I truly believe that we can get the people's work done and do it in a healthy, safe manner, but there's some basic rules that will need to be followed. One of my concerns just personally is when I look at my colleagues, there's 163 of us in the Missouri House. Many of our colleagues have health issues themselves, or we know that back home, back in their districts, they're taking care of folks with serious health issues. So I want to make sure anything we do that we're respectful of people's health. But one of my frustrations with session this spring of 2020 is I have great respect for what the speaker and others were trying to do as far as keeping the building safe and clean. But my concern is that it sent a message to the public that we weren't open to hear their feedback. It made it very hard for people to come in and testify and things like that. So I think whatever we do, we have to figure out a way that constituents, that citizens, lobbyists, everybody can have their opinions heard.
Representative Fitzwater, any thoughts? Yeah, I just think normal's not an option. I think we're in a unique time, and normal, it's not going to be normal. We're not going to see school groups. I would assume we won't see any school groups in the building. Usually the building is packed with, 4th grade classes that come in from across the state and get to see their legislative process in action and get to tour the building. And it's a beautiful, gorgeous building. So I hate to think that the citizens of Missouri can't experience it and be there, but it's a unique time. I think with the nature of the pandemic too, you're going to have legislators that are in contact with COVID that are going to be disqualified for short periods of time to be in the building. And so you're going to have probably you're going to have delays in times. You know, the House being the size that it is probably isn't as concerning maybe to miss time as maybe the Senate would be, because if you have you know 3 or 4 senators that have come into contact with it or exposed to it or have been tested positive for it, and everybody they've been in contact with has to also quarantine for amount of time, it really can stunt the process pretty quick. You know, in a very short period of time, it could all of a sudden be in a delay. And I can foresee us having a number of delays that we're having to be very cautious that until we can really wrap our minds around this thing and get some clarity on the how realistic the vaccines how well those are working, and how well we're contact tracing, those types of things. I think it's just going to be a very unique session, just like 2020 was at the back half of it. I don't think it's easy to predict, but I would say that what it would be easy to predict is that there'll be people absent at varying times, and it'll look very different than it has in the past. And the building again will be quiet, I think, for most of the session.
Thank you. Just to remind everyone, if you do have a question, please use the question and answer tab at the bottom of your screen and type that in, and we'll get that to both the representatives. One last question on the COVID issue is the issue around ratepayers' inability to pay their bills has come up multiple times this year at the Public Service Commission. Do you all feel that may in some fashion or form come before you in your committee, and any thoughts on what that might look like?
I haven't seen any bills that have been pre-filed. You know, I'm a volunteer board member with Consumers Council of Missouri, and that's one of the issues that we're quite concerned about. You know, there are still, you know, so many Missourians that are still unemployed and just don't have the source of income they need to pay everything that's come due, whether we're talking about rent, but utilities as well. So, you know, some of these things, I think the Public Service Commission has some tools at their disposal that they might be able to help us with. And, you know, but I certainly don't want utility companies to be left holding the bag on this either. We have to figure out a way that everything is balanced out. So, but I'm hopeful that in the 2021 session that we're going to have a lot of discussions about meeting the basic needs of Missourians. And that includes issues that all of us care about like energy, but also things like food and housing and everything in that regard. So, and, you know, one of the issues that didn't come up that I consider is COVID related is we are really seeing firsthand now the impact of folks not having access to broadband. There are a lot of Missourians who are unable to work from home, and a lot of Missouri students who are really struggling to be educated. And you know, so that's another issue that I hope we can address as well. We have to figure out a way to reduce these big disparities between the haves and the have-nots, and that includes many things.
And I would say, I think there has been a bill, at least last year, where the IOUs have been working with the broadband providers to get that line to the last mile using the existing infrastructure. And not just the IOUs, don't get me wrong, the co-ops have been leading the way on providing broadband to their customers for years. But is that something you guys expect to see this year? And any comments or thoughts on that?
Yeah, I actually have a bill that I filed that would take the Ameren smart grid that they're building out and use the infrastructure they're already building, the line they're already using, the fiber they're already using to create the smart grid. We want to be able to provide that out to internet service providers so they could lease that line that's being unused by Ameren that they're building out already for the smart grid. And the internet service providers could lease space on those lines all over their footprint and provide broadband services through that. And then the lease dollars would go back to the ratepayers, and the minimal expense that is tagged along on that for Ameren but potentially a way to build out broadband in a unique way is, especially for Ameren's footprint, is to make use of infrastructure we're already building, we're already paying for as ratepayers, but to allow those to be bid out. And then also, there's a really exciting announcement yesterday out of Senator Blunt's office where I think it's around $350 million for broadband from the federal government's coming in to build out broadband. Obviously, now's the time when we're all at home, we're all doing virtual things. Our kids are, my 3-year-old is even doing virtual conferences with some of her preschool friends. And so, the infrastructure is hugely important right now. And I think that's a combination of Missouri taking action, like this broadband bill that I hope we can get some movement on, but also seeing what the federal government is going to do on not only broadband, but their CARES Act funding, some of the things they're helping us provide for communities across the state that we have to, because of our laws, we have to appropriate so the governor can actually expend those dollars. I think will be really important going forward too. And, they're obviously in this big conversation about another stimulus package in DC, and that probably has some impact on our budget and how we can help those in need across the state, whether it's continued unemployment payments, whether it's direct payments, whether it's PPP loans, whatever that can be. We need to take every avenue possible to try to help those in need. And I think Ameren and I think the utilities have done, at least to the extent that they can, they've tried to help in areas of need. I know Ameren did some announcements on providing some relief to those who've lost jobs or having trouble paying their bills. And especially going into the winter months, there's no more important time for energy companies to take care of those in need and to figure out paths for that than right now, when people on fixed incomes really struggle, or people that have lost their jobs and they have to stay home with their kids because their kids aren't in school. These are all really hard dynamics that we've got to be innovative, and government doesn't do innovation very well. But I think Republicans and Democrats, at least seemingly, have a desire to come to the table and figure out policy that can work to take care of our communities. I think we should be doing that.
Representative McCreary, any thoughts?
No, I agree with Representative Fitzwater. I'm hopeful, glass half full person that we can figure out some things that we agree on that can provide some basic assistance to Missourians. I talked to a mom the other day who has an adult daughter that is having to come to her house every day to take a shower so she can go out and look for jobs and things like that. So, these are things like we can all philosophically say, well, people should pull themselves up by their bootstraps. But if you're unable to get gussied up enough to even go and have a job interview and apply for jobs, those are just things that are that a lot of our neighbors are struggling with right now.
Absolutely. So there's a question here about outlook for a new nuclear energy or renewable energy in Missouri. I guess let me phrase it this way, if I can. It seems as if we've seen a larger focus on Missouri-based renewable energy, the number of wind farms in Missouri being developed, large solar farms, both by the municipal and the investor-owned utilities, and with the issue of securitization that may bring the transition from the coal power plants that we have to something else. What are your thoughts on the longer view outlook for Missouri's energy portfolio, whether that's new nuclear, renewables, or a combination? Any thoughts?
I think if Representative McCreary, if you don't mind me jumping in on the nuclear stuff, it kind of excites me. The new technology is just really fascinating. Well, of course, nuclear technology has been innovating over the last 10, 15 years pretty significantly, but I think it just keeps building on itself. I think Idaho is installing a small modular reactor in the near future. I think the big nuclear plant is outside of other countries who don't have the regulatory environment that we do in America are probably not going to be installed like they have been in the past. And we're going to look more at more smaller, efficient, safer modular reactors across the country. But there's some exciting stuff happening there across the board in nuclear power. Not only nuclear power, but economic development within the nuclear innovation space. You know, Missouri uses a research reactor, I think a 10 megawatt research reactor, for cancer research and a number of other innovative technologies to help provide healthcare, which is super fascinating. And that research reactor pays for itself. About 80% of the research they get out of that pays for that project. So it's not really a state-funded project. It's a very well-run situation there. So I think nuclear is a huge opportunity for our energy future. And the reality is, with solar and with wind, you know, the wind's going to stop blowing and the sun's not going to be around. So you have to replace at some point until you can figure out battery power, which I think we're also is another exciting part of solar, is the battery opportunities that are happening. You know, these gigawatt or gigafactories from Tesla and some of these other battery technologies. When you can start storing power, then that's really going to revolutionize, I think, energy infrastructure. But until then, you've got to figure out how to do base load power, fill your base load power needs. And that's why we can't retire these coal plants quite yet, is because we've got to figure out how to create that base load need that our state demands to run all of our computers in our homes and all of our, and now to energize some of our vehicles. We have a significant need for energy. So there's a lot of exciting innovation happening, and I look forward to the future, because I think in not the too distant future, we're going to look very different as an energy environment, kind of in the energy world economy.
Well, I'd like to see us explore other ways to make additional sources of power. I mean, it's no secret that I'd like to see Missouri be a leader in renewable energy, but this ties back to a discussion you're going to have later. It makes no sense for us to make more power if we can't move that power around. So we also have to make sure that we're not putting up roadblocks. You know, if we want to build a small nuclear reactor, you know, we can't ban the use of eminent domain for some company that decides to do that. So we have to have a way to move that power around. And, you know, one of the things there are several participants on this call that work for groups that have been working for solar and other renewable energy sources for years, decades for that matter. But I'm really excited to see corporate America start to, you know, continue to partner and to work with things. Representative Fitzwater and I were really excited to see that Ameren just announced they have a chief renewable development officer in place. You know, so these are things I think when you look around and see that both, you know, nonprofits and citizens are calling for something, but also we see corporate America and some of these utility companies getting on board. To me, that makes me excited that maybe we're all going to be swimming in the same direction in the future.
And I think you see that too, some of Ameren's future plans. You know, they've released some of those plans that moved up their timeline on retiring coal power plants, because they see the future coming a lot faster than they originally thought. And that's how we ought to be doing, not necessarily, in my opinion, not necessarily through government mandate, like here's what you should be doing, because it's so hard for all of us to get our minds wrapped around policy in such a short period of time, like Representative McCreary mentioned earlier with term limits. But let the market kind of figure some of the stuff, and they are, with battery power, with solar energy. You know, there's some regulations we're going to have to probably in the future remove to allow large investment in solar farms. And, you know, there are large companies that are demanding the ability to use more renewable energy within the state. So, you know, we're going to have to figure out paths to really open up the gates and kind of get out of the way for some of these companies to do the innovative things they'd like to take on. But without us even getting involved, they're doing a lot of this on their own. You know, I've just really appreciated Ameren in particular. And I know I'm a homer for Ameren because they're such a big part of my community. But they're doing some really great stuff that ought to be encouraged, and are really excited about what they've got going on.
Well, with that, we come to the close of your session. Thank you both very much for your time. It has definitely been a pleasure to talk with you today. And obviously, I think it should go without saying to work with both of you If we can be of any service, please let any of us know. But thank you and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Josh.
Mhm.
Thanks, Tracy.
Our next session, we're just going across the street from the Missouri Capitol to the Public Service Commission, at least for our first presenter, which will be Ryan Silvey, the chair of the Missouri Public Service Commission. Also on our regulatory update will be Susan Duffy, who chairs the Kansas Corporation Commission. And following her will be Carrie Zelowiski, who is the chair of the Illinois Commerce Commission. One benefit that we have seen from being able to do virtual is the fact that it is always really hard to pull away the busy regulators and elected officials from different states. So we're really, really happy to be able to have all Ryan, Susan, and Carrie here with us. So at this time, I'd like to welcome you all. And first up is Ryan. Chairman Silvey, are you there?
I am. Thank you very much. I very much appreciate the opportunity to be with you guys today. It's always good to see my friends Tracy and Travis from the legislative days. We don't get to see each other in person much anymore, but even on a screen, it's nice. So appreciate the opportunity to be here with Chair Duffy and Chair Zaleski and giving you kind of an update on what's going on regulatory wise in the Midwest, and have the opportunity for the first PowerPoint of the day, which I'm sure everyone is super thrilled about. So let's go ahead and get started. Next slide, please. As you just heard from Travis and Tracy, they mentioned the gas ISRA statute as far as legislation that was passed last session. So I'm not going to spend much time on that. But we did address some things via the rulemaking process this year. One of them being the gas safety rule. I mean, obviously the commission continues to take a proactive approach in Missouri to make sure that our gas systems are safe. And the Natural Gas Pipeline Safety Program is carried out under a cooperation agreement with the U.S. Department of Transportation, Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, or PHMSA, as we all know it. So the most recent changes to the Commission's gas and natural gas pipeline safety regulations are adopting amendments applicable to the federal regulations, which took effect on July 30th. And I apologize because I just jumped right into it. Of course, I'm supposed to remind everyone that anything I say here today is not a declaration of the commission, but the views expressed here are my own as an individual commissioner. So make sure I cover that, or my lawyers will lose their minds. So we also did a net metering rule this year, and it was initially originated out of a working docket on emerging issues back in 2017 and approved by the commission on September 30th. The key modification under this rule change were related to the interconnection agreement, specifically adding a signature page for the customer and solar installer to indicate an acknowledgement of the entire interconnection application. And we also agreed to allow either a physical or electronic signature to satisfy that requirement. Next slide, please. So upcoming, we had a rulemaking on cogeneration, and we considered proposed changes to that rule, and they were submitted about the same time as the net metering rule. But when the proposed changes were discussed by the commission at the end of September, we decided to withdraw that proposed rule change because there were concerns about the pending revisions to PURPA rules and FERC's Order 872 and what implications those could have on the commission, and that we might want to consider in any cogeneration rule. So we immediately opened a new docket that same day to review and collect comments about an appropriate amendment to the cogeneration rule. So the commission would like to proceed expeditiously with this review. Obviously, we started on the same day we rejected the other one. But more than anything, I at least would like to ensure that we get the perspectives of stakeholders on the potential methods to calculate avoided costs that are allowed under Order 872, and the need for possible implications of a standard offer contract. I believe that commission staff is looking at scheduling this workshop around the beginning of January sometime. Also on distributed energy, in light of FERC Order 2222 or 2x4, as some say, I would also anticipate the Commission opening a working docket to assess and address the implications of this order and what, if any, policies the Commission should adopt or revise when it comes to distributed energy resources and aggregation of demand response. So this is obviously a topic of interest. I think in the coming year, we'll probably be seeing this get addressed by commissions around the country if they haven't already. We will also be monitoring what MISO and SPP will be doing in relation to FERC Order 2x4. Next slide, please. So we had an interesting situation come up that's been going on for years over the efficacy of RTO membership. It started way back, I think, before I think any of us on the current commission were even here when what is now Evergy joined SPP. There was a part of that order that said we needed to have a study done to show what the benefits are to the consumer of participating in an RTO. Over the years, that condition has been kicked multiple times. It's been extended because there's concern over the cost of actually doing that kind of a study and whether or not it would be worth it to actually follow through with that condition. So after multiple years and multiple commissioners coming and going, we've decided to open a working docket on this to kind of get the answer and to undertake an examination of the factors and figure out if we can get to this or not. Because I do think it's important, and obviously the commission that allowed them to join SPP thought it was important. So it's something we're trying to finally get a resolution on. Next slide, please. So we did have an accounting authority order issued on the Sibley coal plant retirement. And the recent decision by the Supreme Court of Missouri to deny the application of transfer in this case was a big win for the commission because it reaffirmed the Western District's opinion. The key takeaways from the Western District's opinion are, first, the court affirmed the commission's order granting an AAO requested by ratepayers to capture a utility's cost savings after the retirement of a coal plant. And two, this was the first time a Missouri court has affirmed the use of an AAO requested by ratepayers to capture utility cost savings. All previous AAOs reviewed by the courts had been requested by utility companies to capture extraordinary expenses. So in this case, the court said that the commission's accounting power under section 393.140 sub 4 and sub 8 is not a one-way street, and it can also be used to address utility revenues. So I think this was an important development this year. Next slide, please. So obviously COVID has affected everybody, and this is a big issue that not only all of the ratepayers have had to deal with, the companies have had to deal with, the commission has had to deal with. And in Missouri, our regulated public utilities have continued to provide safe and reliable service through this pandemic. And we have supported the utilities' voluntary efforts to support their customers during this difficult time. As early as mid-March, utilities started either requesting waivers or variances from the commission, or for not requiring commission approval, informing the commission of decisions to waive fees. And at the request of many utilities, the commission authorized those variances or waivers of certain tariff provisions, and the commission approved several requests by utilities to forego assessing late payment fees and to suspend the disconnection of service due to non-payment. Due to the specific language in the tariff, some utilities were able to adopt similar provisions even without commission approval. There were also some low-income program modifications that the companies have offered to the customers to allow continued participation and expansion of those programs. And then there was the creation of a stakeholder group that started back in March, actually, at the request of the utilities. Initially, it was a weekly call between the utilities, the commission, and OPC, sharing information on customer accounts and lessons that they've learned. But it's actually transitioned to include a more diverse group of participants. And now it's OPC, commission staff, utilities, interest groups, and state representatives from the Energy, Economic Development, and Health departments. So they now meet bi-weekly, and they track a number of indicators like the number of counts that are in arrears, total balances of arrearages, and number of disconnects. Next slide, please. So we also opened a working docket monitoring the impacts and best practices back on May 13th on how to deal with the recovery of past due customer payments after this pandemic is over. And even though the commission recognized that in response to the pandemic, utilities have taken action to suspend disconnects for customers' non-payment utility bills, we also recognize that once the emergency is passed, utilities are going to have to be faced with the questions of how to collect those past due accounts without unduly burdening the vulnerable customers. So after staff filed its report, the commission requested for staff to continue to monitor the key parameters related to past due payments for a 6-month period. Next slide, please. So in addition to all this, the commission itself has had to adapt in a number of ways in dealing with the pandemic. And we've actually been working remotely since about February. So over 9 months now, we've been doing nearly everything remotely, and the trains have continued to run on time. We've continued to have our hearings. We've continued to have public inputs at those hearings for local public hearings have now moved virtual. And going forward, we're actually assessing how our staff is going to transition back to the office and what does that look like? Because I think all of the world really is looking at how is work life going to be affected by this long term. And we've done surveys with our staff, and actually a majority of them would like to continue or show interest in continuing to work from home, at least in some capacity, after this pandemic is over. So we're currently going through the process of assessing that and figuring out how we can continue to provide the service to the taxpayers and provide our employees the flexibility to continue working from home if they choose. Next slide, please. So, I mean, as many of you are aware, the goals of the SEAMS Liaison Committee, which was started back in 2019, is to identify potential areas of improvements along the MISO and SPP SEAM, including equal considerations of beneficial regional and interregional projects in transmission planning. Some of the recent committee activities, we've had stakeholder feedback, requested and analyzed feedback from stakeholders on the white paper on the history of the MISO SPP SEAM and on potential analysis to be performed on markets, operations, transmission planning issues along that SEAM. We've also had an analysis of market and operations issues on the SEAM contracted with the SPP Market Monitoring Unit and the MISO Independent Market Monitor, performing an analysis on the market's operations issues for that SEAM with 4 reports delivered in fiscal year 2020. Next slide, please. SEAM. You know, a lot of effort's been invested in transmission planning within the RTOs and at the SEAMs over the last 5 years, but unfortunately, we haven't seen quite the level of success that we had hoped for. So to address the SEAMs planning, MISO and SPP have developed a new approach for interconnection transmission planning, which will kick off on December 11th, just a couple days from now. And this will be a 12-month study to identify transmission projects to address interconnection challenges. And finally, the impact of all the renewables being added to the generation matrix on the transmission system and the continued monitoring of those. You know, we can't afford to get behind in this. It's going to impact long-term the goals of utilities and our state. Next slide, please. FERC 2222 or 2x4. This is a pretty big deal, and unlike most states that either have only one RTO or one primary RTO, Missouri is nearly equally divided between SPP and MISO and electric cooperatives. So we have multiple SEAMs going everywhere, and given that each RTO is going to approach this order differently, we're going to be monitoring how SPP and MISO respond to FERC on the 2x4 order. Next slide, please. And, you know, as mentioned towards the end of the last discussion, utilities are continuing to decarbonize. You know, Ameren has a goal to achieve a net zero carbon emissions by 2050 and add 5,400 megawatts of renewables by 2040. Evergy has large amounts of wind to be added and are working towards similar decarbonization goals. And while most people assume that these decisions are based on regulatory requirements, it actually appears that environmental social governance keys are really the driving factor behind this now, because many investors just simply won't invest in new coal-fired plants. And so that pressure from Wall Street is really pushing down the renewable adoption from that angle, as opposed to governments telling them what to do. So the overall impact is that this is positive from a decarbonization perspective, but it does place greater stress on the current transmission systems and highlights the importance of making the necessary improvements to the transmission systems as we prepare for continuously higher renewable loads. So with that, I think we have one more slide if you want to check that last one. Yeah, just, you know, as always, we're continuing to monitor what's going on at FERC and participating in cases before FERC as we feel it is necessary for protecting the interests of Missourians. So with that, again, appreciate the opportunity to be here and provide an update. And I think as we mentioned, I do have an actual commission agenda meeting pretty quickly approaching within minutes. So, but thank you again, Josh, for having me here.
Thank you, Chairman, very much. I understand you have your meeting, so you won't be around for questions, but there are...
I do see the questions there in chat. I'm sorry, RTO is a regional transmission organization. For those that aren't familiar with that term, that's they're organized by FERC, and multiple states participate in them based on what region of the country they're in, and they affect the markets of how the energy flows across state lines. So hopefully that answers that question.
It did. It was great. Thank you so much. We'll talk soon.
All right.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Chair Duffy from the Kansas Corporation Commission. Chair Duffy, there you are. Fantastic.
Good morning. Thank you. First of all, Josh, I'd like to thank you for your very affordable fee to get into this program this week. Shoot, for 15 bucks, man, you're quite the deal after the good discussion yesterday. So thank you very much. I think you're setting a trend. At least I hope so. I appreciate the opportunity to see my fellow chairs. Carrie and I pretty much started at the same time, and Chair Sylvia and I have had a couple of discussions. First of all, I would agree with Chair Sylvia. You got to have the disclaimers. So what I'm going to talk about today is me. My opinions and not the opinion of the entire commission. So what do we have going on? Despite a merger that took place a couple of years ago, and therefore a moratorium on rates with our biggest utility, there's a lot of activity going on. First of all, related to distributed generation, this is an ongoing docket, so I'm limited in what I can talk about. This issue was remanded back to us from the Kansas Supreme Court. And just last month, we had a public hearing. And typically on the public hearings, I've been on the commission now for a little over a year. We've had maybe 3, 4, maybe 12 folks participate, even though we may have been in the high school gym with another location 2 hours away in another high school gym, just not very many participants. With Zoom, we had over 80 folks sign up and 50 some offer comments, which I thought was astounding. I mean, it was great. We set parameters that they had 3 minutes. The timer was there. They could see it. We let them in to the waiting room, and then announce them ahead of time. This went really well. And for us as a commission, it did change the way we do business with the public. I think this was a good thing. And I would hope that we keep this model because it appears to work. If you want to hear from the public, you've got to do it from their living room or kitchen table. I think this will be something I hope that we keep in the future on public hearings, is that we're face to face, and it really was up close and personal, and I think extremely helpful. So anyway, we have that docket going. We have our hearing next week on this. This is a big issue in Kansas as it is in other states. And I think it's one that really does require us to put on our thinking caps in a major way. Securitization. It's another issue here in Kansas as it is in Missouri and so many other places. I appreciated the discussion yesterday. I'm hopeful that we will have a bill that goes to the legislature. I understand there's going to be a bill in Missouri. There's a lot of states. This isn't bleeding edge. There's a lot of states we can draw on. Colorado, Florida. I mean, a lot of good examples. Montana. So I'm hoping that we can walk into the legislature. This is the third year that they will have dealt with this issue, as there's been bills in the past. We can get a bill through that is win-win for everybody. This is, I think, fundamental to us going forward. And hopefully everybody will sharpen their pencils and get serious about it, so that we can have a bill at the beginning of the session and try and get this through. Cybersecurity issues. This is a topic that, well, I think it's kind of, you don't know what you don't know. But when we were back at NARUC last year and heard the update of things going on, it really did kind of become real to me that we have an obligation to ensure that our utilities are where they should be in protecting the infrastructure of their organization. As such, I've talked with Chair Sylvie, and even though we've participated in a NERC CIP exercise with Evergy this last month, I've talked with Chair Sylvie, and we are going to do a shared tabletop exercise between the two commissions and Evergy coming up this year. I think this is something critical for both states and for the company at hand. Hopefully this will then transition next year into beyond the tabletop. And I have to give credit to all FERC and others who have said, let us know when you're doing this. We want to help you. We want to walk you through this. We want to be a part. So that's on our radar screen. Performance-based rate making. This is something that and revenue decoupling, these are two issues we have to address, and sooner rather than later. There was a study done by two groups. London Economics is one. It was financed by the legislature, and we have a responsibility to seriously dive into both these issues because these are going to be the catalysts that move us forward as we kind of devolve away from the old way of doing business with old thoughts, old technology, old rewards, old incentives. So both of these things, we've got to get staff engaged and the companies and the legislature and start making some headway. Workshops. We just completed a workshop on a Evergy Sustainability Transformation Plan. To me, this was critical to our understanding of where the company is going, but by bringing in other entities to speak and ask questions and share their thoughts, I think broadened horizons greatly. And I do believe that workshops are an essential tool for commissioners and for staff to get breadth and depth of understanding or misunderstanding with the public, but also with the stakeholders, all stakeholders. So I hope that we continue these workshops. Yes, they take time, but I think the value is extremely important. And I think we ought to do this on a variety of issues. And I think it's important for me as a commissioner, but really more important for staff to understand the publicness. Let's see here. I've got some other notes. I think a lot of what we're looking at is going to be affected by what happens with the federal government and the change in leadership. I believe there has not been any leadership as it relates to our subject matters. And I'm hoping that that would be helpful if on these very critical issues that we really do get some input at the very top, the executive branch. I'm not expecting much from the legislative branch, as I believe they are in true gridlock. And I just don't see that changing. And that is sad, because we need them to be on so many issues. We need them to pass legislation. Overall, I believe that we have a responsibility as commissioners to ensure that our staff is getting the information they need. They're participating in webinars. I think this COVID has helped in that we could not take staff to different NARUC meetings and such, but the webinars have just been ongoing. They've been good. They've had a lot of information. We've encouraged our staff that while you're home and maybe there's not something right in front of you today, take advantage of the webinars and the education that's out there. It was interesting to listen to the laboratories talk about how they are collaborating and putting together information and webinars and sharing among themselves. We need to be there learning with them. And I do appreciate the value of what's coming down the pike, so we have an understanding, so that when it does become scalable, that we're informed and we're involved. And I think that is something that, as a commissioner, is my job to ensure that staff is engaged. With that, I would like to announce that we have finally hired an energy director for our energy office. His name is Mr. Keith Cooney. He comes to us from Oregon. He was the energy policy manager in the Community Action Partnership of Oregon. He is a Kansas kid coming back home, so that's great. We welcome him. He just started the end of the month, and hopefully, Josh, he will, I'm hoping he's on today, and that he will learn from what all you are doing here in Missouri. I'm very impressed by the model that you have, and the programs that you put on. With that, I can answer any questions. I don't know if I guess there are some out there.
Thank you so much, Chair Duffy. I appreciate it. I look forward to working with your new director. If there's anything that we can collaborate on across party lines, that would be great. Or not party lines, state lines.
State lines, that's right, because it's just geography, right? And I think we have a lot to learn from each other. I see there's a couple of questions in terms of performance-based rate making. And that is typical. It's just, let me see. It is a different way to provide financial incentives to lower rates and costs or improve non-price performance, so that you tie it to something different than instead of just building. And instead of just building stuff, you tie it to their actual performance. So that answers that. And revenue decoupling. So I think as we look at decoupling, it's a revenue adjustment mechanism that really does reduce the risk for utilities and consumers by separating sales from revenues. And I think this is intrinsic as we talk about solar. Definitely.
Great, thank you.
And
Chair, will you be able to stay on after Chair Zaleski's presentation?
yes, I will. So, and good, so good to see you, Carrie.
Great. Well, we will, I encourage everyone to continue to provide questions through the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. But at this time, we'll go ahead. Chair Zaleski, thank you so much for joining us from Illinois. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My video is not up. I'm assuming you can see me as well.
Yes.
Great. Okay. Good morning. It's great to see you, Susan. Thank you, Josh, for the invitation. Thank you to the Missouri Energy Initiative. I've already learned a lot by hearing from my good friends, Chair Sylvie and Duffy, about everything that's going on in Missouri and Kansas. I have to say, I had the Kansas state logo in front of me, ad astra per aspera. I may be butchering it, but I did a quick Google, and it means through hardship to the stars, and I can't think of a more on point or relevant the state logo. So that's very inspiring. It's a great state logo. Thanks for having me. I'm Carrie Zaleski, Chair of the Illinois Commerce Commission. And same disclaimer, these are my thoughts and my thoughts alone and do not necessarily reflect those of the Illinois Commerce Commission. I am going to mention, by way of high level, just by way of example, some of our open dockets, just to show you kind of where we've been in the last year and where we're going. And I will not speak anything more than that, which is in the public domain, or just like I said, by high level. So if you can move to the next slide. Next slide. Okay, so I think this is on top of mind at all commissions, but I want to just take a moment in time to talk about a very particular meeting, our March 18th meeting, where these 4 bullets happened all at one meeting. This was right after our state shutdown, after Governor Pritzker issued a statewide shutdown stay-at-home order. And following that order, we entered a couple of really important dockets in response to this pandemic. First, a moratorium on disconnection. So this was shutting down, asking for the investor-owned utilities, those which we regulate, to cease disconnections and imposition on late fees, and also file with the commission a docket for a plan of how to go forward with flexible payment plans and how to go forward with what to do with moratoriums. And I'll talk a little bit more about where we are with the moratorium on disconnections in the next docket. The next bullet point is moratorium on in-person marketing by Aries and AGS. So Illinois is a restructured state, unlike Missouri and Kansas, and so we have retail choice, alternative retail electric suppliers, or AGSs, alternative gas suppliers, and we regulate certain aspects of business practices. And so what the commission did was we ordered a moratorium of in-person marketing. So the commission determined that going door to door and selling their product was not conducive with COVID concerns. So this was an order that was issued in an emergency basis by the commission. Third, we entered on this March meeting a notice of inquiry on affordability. So this was something that was in the works to issue a notice of inquiry. There's a lot of prep work. So it was in the works for a couple of months, but I mention it here because it is, I would argue, very timely. Affordability is, I think, always an issue and something that should be thought through and revisited. The definition of affordability, if we really are getting the help to the people that need it most, but arguably there might be a new type of affordability as we move past the COVID, the pandemic, and how it impacts people's lives and their economic stability. But also in the years and months after of, it's not sure how the economy will recover. So this is an ongoing notice of inquiry. And then I have to talk a little bit about the way we moved to remote working. The props really go to our staff, our IT staff. We thought they were good, but they certainly proved it in the days and weeks after the shutdown. I've been working in state government at the state of Illinois for 15 years, and I have been on many of calls and working groups discussing of how we could figure out a way to let state employees work remotely once a month to be more like the federal government, and we could never crack that nut. Well, we did it in one weekend. It was a long weekend. Being on the phone with my general counsel and our interim executive director, who is also our Bureau Chief of Public Utilities, and senior IT staff, and we did it within hours. And staff continued on not missing a beat, doing everything remotely from our hearings. Under emergency order, we had the ability as commissioners to engage a quorum remotely. And we, when the shutdown happened, we were streaming our meetings by audio, and it was poor audio. And so I requested, nicely asked our IT staff if we could shift over to a better video streaming capabilities. And again, they did it in 2 days. And this is one of those examples where we'll probably not go back. This is something that was good that came out of the process of moving to working remotely. There we are. We started in March and we still are remote, and it looks like we'll be there for the very near foreseeable future. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about the moratorium on disconnection docket. There's been a lot of twists and turns, and so I just want to cover kind of where we started and then skip to where we are now so you have an understanding of the current state of play. So I talked about that March meeting, and we asked the parties to come back to the commission and file their approach to going forward. And what the parties did was they got together and they negotiated a stipulation. And by parties, I mean the utilities working with the Attorney General's office and CUB and other entities to figure out a best an approach that everyone can agree on. So, we were really glad to see the parties could come together in this way with a stipulation that was presented to the commissioners, and we ordered in June. So this is a stipulation that had moratoriums in places with different deadlines that have come and gone, but have since been extended. But two things I want to mention that was a really important part of the consumer protections that are still in place. Deferred payment arrangements, which are always in place, the ability for somebody who has arrearages built up to call their utility and ask for more time to chip away at their arrearage. And the deferred payment arrangement under these new protections would lengthen the time to 18 months with less money down, even down to 10%. And if you can prove hardship or that you're low income, even down to 0, that's an important point. Another really landmark important piece of consumer protections in this approach was bill assistance payments protection. So if you were a customer and you called your utility, explained your hardship, you may qualify for an amount off, a fixed amount off of your arrearage. Depends on the utility, depends on your circumstance, but it's really a great tool for someone that's really struggling and watching their back pay build up. And so currently, skipping to where we are today, we have the investor-owned utilities, large investor-owned utilities that we regulate, have agreed to a winter moratorium. So there is a winter moratorium for gas and electric in the state of Illinois, but it's layers, and we say at the commission, the cocktails of regulations that lead to effective moratorium through the winter months. But so that there was clear and certainty for customers, the utilities have pledged to a full moratorium so that there's comfort in their customers knowing that they will not be shut off till March 31st on the gas and electric side. Now for water, there is no winter moratorium, but what the two investor-owned utilities that we regulate on the water side agreed to do was agreed to no moratorium for those that either are low income, they are eligible for LIHEAP, for example, or they self-certify. And so if you call and you explain that you're experiencing a hardship because of COVID, and it's really just explaining your situation, you can qualify for this extra protection. Okay, next slide. This is I wanted to highlight that we had a lot of notice of inquiries this year, and again, kudos goes to the staff, because what this does is we commissioners have questions they want to pose to the public to gather information in a public setting, and then we receive just amounts of responses that our staff has to organize. So we have created a lot of extra work for them, and we appreciate that. But I want to note some of them in case people are interested in following along with these notice of inquiries. First is transportation, electrification, and other beneficial electrification. And the idea here is that, it's a priority for the state and to the Illinois Commerce Commission and our governor that we increase the EV deployment in the state of Illinois. So we wanted to ensure that that there was no barriers created or barriers in place for rate design for in consideration of EV infrastructure. So there's questions in there about whether barriers exist and what we can and should do to remove those barriers. I want to note in this docket there is questions about if there are barriers for low income EV owners, and what and if we should do something too. So there is definitely a focus on low income and ensuring that they have access to beneficial electrification as well. Second is the notice of inquiry regarding electric and natural gas service safety and reliability. There have been and always will be concerns on safety and also reliability on electric lines and gas pipelines. So these are questions posed to the public to ensure that we're doing everything that we can and should be doing within our authority at the Commission to ensure safety and reliability around these lines and these pipes. And then the third is the NOI regarding energy affordability. I mentioned this earlier in the March meeting, so I don't repeat now, but those are the three notice of inquiries that are open. The public can file responses to the questions, and then they will be made available to the public. Next slide, please. We have two rulemakings in 2020, and they're both currently still open. Interconnection rules. So at the Illinois Commerce Commission, we have authority, and we interact with our sister agency, the Illinois Power Agency, the Illinois Power Agency runs the procurements of the renewable energy credits. So procuring the RECs on behalf of the utilities who collect the money from customers to meet some of our renewable energy, renewable portfolio standards. So in that docket of determining how the procurements are to be run, the Illinois Power Agency puts forward a plan, and the Commission approves it. But in that docket, there was a conversation and concerns raised about interconnection rules, Part 466 and Part 467 rules, issues with timing of queue issues and potential costs. And so this was something that the Commission was made aware that should be explored more. So this summer, there were workshops that ensued, and the workshops are a stakeholder process where the commissioners are not involved, but the idea is to come to a consensus with all the groups to hopefully narrow the rule that would go forward, and to, if there is a consensus, to to make sure the negotiation is proper and captured. So from there, a rule was filed before the commission, which is currently open before us. So we are now at first notice of our interconnection rules with a completion date of December of 2022. And our Aries Heat Act compliance. So the Illinois General Assembly put into place a statute called the Heat Act, and it was meant to increase consumer protections for I talked a little bit about these Aries and AGS going door to door, and so some of the protections to ensure that the marketing tools used to have more information and to make sure that there's not targeting of low-income customers. So because of the change in the statute, we realized that we had to make sure our rules, our 412 and 512, which speak to a lot of these same compliance issues, were in line with the changes in statute. So that is the impetus of that rulemaking, with the completion date of January of 2022. Next slide, please. I talked a little bit about the procurement and how the ICC interacts with the Illinois Power Agency in this procurement process. So I thought it might be interesting to highlight some of the procurements in the state of this year. So under FEJA, the Future Energy Jobs Act, we did have in Illinois a renewable portfolio standard, but it just made it more robust. It added to the renewable portfolio standard this concept of community solar and adjustable block. ABP is adjustable block program. And actually the slide should read, the number 13,743 is the number of projects, and that's the number of adjustable block projects. So it should actually read community solar and DG projects. So this is the RECs that are procured by the Illinois Power Agency, not the energy or capacity, but just the environmental attribute that's procured. And so this is the snapshot of the year, 13,000 projects with 172 megawatts and 251,000 annual RECs. And then shifting over to the right, 70 Illinois Solar for All projects, and then with the boxes below with more information. So Illinois Solar for All is something that was new under FEJA as well, and the idea is to ensure that people that may not otherwise have access to participate in the transfer to clean energy, low income, for example, low-income customers can participate. So these are ways to allow low-income customers to participate in things like rooftop or community solar, or non-for-profits to participate with no money down or very little money down, and protections to ensure they're not paying more if they shift over to solar. So this is the RECs that were procured by the state. And just to have some concepts of how these RECs, what the price of the RECs are going for in Illinois, under the adjustable block program, RECs were, generators were receiving between $11 to $32 per REC, where Illinois Solar for All RECs were going for as high as $96 per REC. So that just gives you a little bit of understanding of, yes, the RECs are going for higher, but that is something that is a priority to Illinois. This idea of equity and inclusion, which I'll talk about a little bit more in the future, what the future holds. But it is a theme that we are continuously seeing in the state of Illinois. Next slide, please. So this is Governor Pritzker's 8 principles for clean energy that was released in August of this year. And before this, there's been a conversation about energy legislation coming for some time now. There's some fixes that need to be made, for example, the funding of the procurement that I was speaking to and other ideas. And I think the legislation just starts including more and more, and they become larger and larger pieces. So there were some bills that were floating around, some language floating around in Springfield. One was the Clean Energy Jobs Act, FEJA, not to be confused with FEJA that's in place, and the Path to 100, for example, that encapsulated a lot of ideas. So what the governor did was he put forward his principles. Now, was not legislative language. These were just ideas and principles, priorities that he saw that he would like to see in legislation that comes to his desk eventually. So he has these 8 pillars. There's a lot of words on this slide. I want to just, and it talks about a lot of different topics. But I want to note a couple things about the principles. If you want to Google it online, there's a lot of information. You can read his principles written out. He talks about the urgent need to address climate change, hoping to make Illinois a global and national leader on clean energy, investing in battery storage technology, for example. But he talks about going forward with a market-based solution like carbon pricing. So with the MOPR order that came out from the FERC in December of last year, there was a national conversation of possibly some states that had the state subsidies moving to an FRR, or fixed resource requirement, which was one approach. Well, in Governor Pritzker's his 8 principles, he speaks to the fact that perhaps the FRR is not the right approach, and maybe a market-based solution might be a better approach. And so he just, that's something he mentions in his principles. He talks a lot about electrifying the transportation sector. In Illinois, we have currently 25,000 EVs registered in the state. And in his principles, he calls for a goal of 750,000 EVs by 2030, and talks about some ideas of how to get there. There's a lot of conversation about transitioning communities, and this is probably a similar issue in both Kansas and Missouri, where we have these communities that rise and fall by the jobs that are created by some of these fossil fuel generating plants that we are shifting away from. And not only the jobs, but the tax base, the schools that really rely on this money. And so there's conversations of how we support these communities to ensure that they aren't left behind in the transition to clean energy. And there's a lot of conversation about diversity and inclusion. Illinois has a really great story to tell about their diverse spend by utilities. They've been reporting for 5 years. There are utilities reporting up to 40% diverse spend in Illinois, which is really great. But there's even more conversation about annual reporting of C-suite diversity, for example, and other ideas. So there's a lot there, but those were just some ones I wanted to highlight. Next slide, please. So that was 2020. I'm going to just 2 slides on what we may have coming ahead of us in 2021. Next slide, please. I talked a little bit about the governor's principles and CEJA. And CEJA, there was more changes to legislation that was recently released. And so this kind of gives us a snapshot of what legislation might look like. Of course, it's the sausage-making process is always a mystery, and we're not sure where we'll end. But CEJA speaks to reaching 100% renewable by 2050. In speaking about the transportation sector, CEJA calls for Ameren and ComEd to file beneficial electrification plans for the period beginning 6/1/2022. So coming up with a plan of how we reach some of these transportation electrification goals. And speaking of transportation electrification and inclusion and diversity, there's conversations about how to bridge the gap between work and homes, and fostering a diverse, clean job, entrepreneurship, and business portfolio. So again, we can ensure that there really is inclusion as we move to this clean energy economy. Okay, next slide. All right, so at the ICC, I put up 4 what I would characterize as decarbonization dockets. I'll touch on decarbonization concepts. I talked about interconnection already, so I won't talk about that again. And then below that is the utilities energy efficiency plans for 4 years that they will be filing before the utility or before the commission this year. And then on the upper right, the continuing docket determining the value of solar. In the state of Illinois, we had under legislation, we have full net metering until the penetration of solar reaches 5%. And afterwards, after we reach 5%, the Illinois Commerce Commission is to determine a value of solar. So looking at how solar interacts with the grid and assigning a value, a rebate for time, how it interacts, looking at particular characteristics of time and how it adds value, maybe to reduce congestion, for example. So this is a very technical docket that's open before us now, and we will be working on that for some time. And then below that is the long-term renewable resource plan, and this is that procurement plan that I've already discussed a little bit about, that the IPA, the Illinois Power Agency, implements. And so there'll be another iteration that will come and be filed before the commission to determine how these procurements will be run. Okay, and then that's my final slide on that. If there's going from the bottom, adjustable block program, that refers to the way the procurement is run. It's blocks, and we use a lottery system to we set it. There's a price set by the Illinois Power Agency, and they contract through an outside source, and they're set in a very particular way. But it's how REC's prices are set, and then different generators can bid at those different prices. REC is renewable energy credits. That's that environmental attribute that I mentioned, so a value because it's considered a clean source. And then water shutoffs, I may have answered, but I'll just, if I wasn't clear, and I don't know if this is before or after I said, water shutoffs in Illinois. Now, we do not regulate unis and co-ops, so this is only the investor-owned utilities on the water side. There's 3. They are no shutoffs during the winter months for low income. So not only those who qualify for low income, but also those who self-certify. So they call and explain their hardship.
Chair Duffy, it looks like a similar question for you as well about not only water shutoffs, but there was a question referencing Missouri there. Can you talk about shutoffs there for Kansas?
Sure. We really do not have responsibility for water utilities in the state. We only regulate, I believe there are 2 or 3, and they're very, very small out in very rural populations. So that's not under our purview. And as it relates to COVID, and Sierra Club had a question there. I would say that in terms of what they should do, we have the Citizen Utility Ratepayer Board. Of course, Sierra Club can always visit with them. I would also add that as the state has not shut down at this point in time, all our requirements have been lifted as a commission that we had on beginning in March. Most of them expired in May and June. However, many utilities have instituted their own under a voluntary basis. I didn't mean to neglect COVID. It's just I felt I was running out of time. I do believe it's going to be interesting how we look at this in 6 months to a year and how we treat, all of us have had accounting orders where the companies are accumulating their data. This will be the longest storm in history. However we treat it, I'm sure will be similar to that, but at this time, we do not have any other moratoriums planned. That may change if we go to a total state shutoff, but I'm not aware that we're going to be doing that.
Okay.
I
Well-
also would, if I could, Josh, Carrie talked about how their staff and Chair Sylvie did too. They were prepared and ready to work from home. So were we. And I really credit our IT staff, how nimble we were and really far ahead of our Department of Administration guidance. We were prepared before I think they were. Here's the downside. I don't think we'll ever be all of us back in the building like we were before. The genie's kind of out of the box. I think that's a good thing. But I do believe there's a downside, and that is that hall conversation. As we have a lot of folks ready for retirement and we bring in younger staff that stand around and let's just meet in the hallway. And I heard the discussion outside the door, that sort of thing, stopping Jim and say, hey, come in and tell us what happened, 2 years ago on this docket. We're missing a lot of that, I think, with our younger staff. We're missing that camaraderie. I do think for some of our staff, we've indicated to them, if you would rather come in, we have a pretty big building, come in, and we'll just make sure that you are away from everybody else. Working at home for some of our folks has not been a good thing. It's too many people at home, not being able to concentrate and focus on their work, especially if it's very detailed work. We were ready for our data so that it could be securely accessed. That was not the issue. But I think there are some other issues related to our staff that we really need to be aware of. I work with the United Way, and I also understand a lot of women are more at risk by continuing to work at home in an abusive situation or where tempers run high. I think we need to just be mindful that one size does not fit all for our employees, and we need to work with them to find the best environment.
Thank you very much, Chair. We'll have one last question before we end this session. Commissioner Zaleski, it was for you, and it was whether your Solar for All program was being recognized and identified by other states or commissions, and people are seeking some information and support from you.
I don't really have anything to add. It's a really great question. I know there's a lot of interest on this topic. I was speaking on a NARUC panel that was talking about equity and inclusion, and this was something that came up. And so maybe in speaking about it on different forums, there'll be interest. I haven't been personally contacted. I think I can't speak for my sister agency, the Illinois Power Agency, whether they have as well. I always think it's great to collaborate. I think it's great to learn from other states. I know if other states are out there that are doing it, I'd like to hear what they're doing as well. So I don't really have a great answer other than not that I'm aware of. I personally haven't been contacted. But if there are questions, please feel free to reach out to our commission, and happy to provide answers.
Thank you both very much. It was great to be able to have your voices take part again in this conference. Really do appreciate it. It's good to see what our neighbors are doing as well. So again, thank you so much. Have a great rest of your week. And if there's anything we can do for you, please let us know.
Thank you.
Be well. Thank you.
Well, at this time, I am honored to deliver our first ever Jim Fisher Lifetime Achievement Award. As I had mentioned before, this year, the MEI Board of Directors created an award to celebrate the life of a founding member of MEI, Jim Fisher, who passed away earlier this year. This award commemorates the life and work of Jim and recognizes leaders who have made significant contributions to the energy field and their community. Jim's professional career spanned 4 decades of service in the federal government and land-grant university system. His energized philosophy led him being a mentor to many colleagues like myself and graduate students. And he was recognized as a leader in both renewable and agriculture sectors. He led departments, colleges, extension systems at the University of Missouri, Michigan State, and Clemson University. He managed research programs at the University Department of Agriculture and was on the board of directors for the U.S. Department of Energy. His unique insights on the energy, environment, agriculture nexus have been fused by extensive experience in each of these sectors and has been passed along to many of the people of the lives he's touched. With that, I am pleased to announce that after a variety of nominations and the board vote, I, on behalf of the MEI board, would like to congratulate Steve Mahfood, the recipient of the 2020 inaugural Jim Fisher Lifetime Achievement Award, as the recipient. Steve has a 45-year track record as an innovator and a leader in environmental, energy, and natural resource fields. Steve was appointed for 8 years by successive governors as the director of the Missouri Department of Natural Resources and represented Missouri as a presidential appointment, chairing the NAFTA U.S. Governmental and Environmental Advisory Commission, a congressional appointment to serve on the Anthony Commission on Environmental Infrastructure Finance, and served on EPA's Environmental Financial Advisory Board under 3 presidents. Steve received the United States Presidential Environmental Achievement Award in 1989 and established Mahfood and Associates after leaving the Missouri Department of Natural Resources. Steve has also worked in government affairs as advisor to a variety of different groups, including the Nature Conservancy and others, on environmental, energy, natural resources, and carbon management and climate change issues. I've known Steve for a very long time, and Steve is a former board member of MEI and is a stalwart in the community. And with that, Steve, this is the downfall of virtual. I can't hand you the award, but I would like to say that part of this award is MEI being unique and supportive of Missouri. So will the award be different each time. And this time I'm pleased to provide you a specifically crafted piece of art from a St. Louis artisan that will be coming your way, made from a variety of different pieces of wood for your mantle.
Thanks, Josh. Wow, that's amazing. I'm just very briefly, I'm really, really honored to receive this award in a good friend like Jim Fisher's name. Miss him very much in this field. And I feel very humbled by the fact that I'm receiving this first award, because there's so many people that we've all worked with, and my fellow MEI board members, and so many of us in the state of Missouri and here in the Midwest with our sister states. So many people that deserve this award. And I'm just so appreciative of having had the time to serve on the MEI board, and folks like Roger Walker, and who got MEI moving in the first place, and along with Jim and others, have just made the role of MEI just become more and more important. And knowing that I'm strongly feel that we've got to embrace renewable energy efficiency, and the collaboration that it takes to do that between industry, government, and citizens groups. I know MEI as a leader will continue to lead, Josh, under your tutelage. And I just want to thank everybody for, again, for this recognition, this honor, because I feel like it's deserved by so many people. And I'm just humbled beyond words. So thank you so much. And please, everyone, stay safe and stay healthy. And thank you so much for this award.
Absolutely, Steve. Thank you for taking the time and for all of the work that you have done over the years. It's glad to have you part of the Missouri community. So thank you.
Thanks, Josh.
Okay, so after that, we are ready to move on to our next session. And our next session is, hopefully, we have a lot of positive news coming from Rob Dixon, the director of the Missouri Department of Economic Development, on us getting out of the economic slump created by COVID-19. I know, Rob, you have a lot of great news and exciting things to share with us, right?
Certainly hope so, Josh. It's a pleasure to be here today and visit with you. I hate the fact that we have to do this online, but it's just the nature of our times, I think. But I do appreciate the opportunity to visit today. As Josh mentioned, it has been just one heck of a year. Obviously, I know you felt it in the energy industry as well. We've certainly seen it in our state's economy. But it is not all gloom and doom as it relates to, the economic development initiatives of our state. Think about where we were, think about kind of where we were at before this all started. The governor has really outlined an economic development strategy that I think is really fundamentally based on what matters in the economy. And there's all kinds of different discussion topics, and people kind of get excited about different things in economic development. But I fundamentally believe that if you do workforce development well, and if you do infrastructure development well, then those are really the fundamental building blocks of your economy. And frankly, those were the governor's priorities: workforce development, infrastructure. If anybody heard Governor Parson talk about economic development before the pandemic started, you heard those two words. And I think we're actually seeing the results of some of that really balanced approach paying off right now. So what I'd like to do today is kind of talk a little bit about where we have come in terms of our journey this year in the economy. Obviously, it's been an unprecedented year on just about every facet, but the recovery itself, talk about where we're at on that front, and really talk about where we're going from there. So just again, thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for the members of MEI. I know many of the folks that are on the board and involved in the organization are key supporters of economic development, and we appreciate the partnership. So if you can go to the next slide. Thanks. So to start off with, Missouri was really doing well in economic development before the pandemic. For those who'd worked with us through our Best of Midwest initiative, you know that we set out a journey to fundamentally reset our entire approach to economic development. We had been falling behind other states. We needed to get more competitive, and I was really pleased to see that a lot of those needles were starting to move in our direction for the state of Missouri. Just before the pandemic hit, we had a historic high number of people in our state getting up and going to work every single day to earn a paycheck for their families. Nearly 3 million Missourians employed in our state. That's literally was historic highs. But then the bottom fell out for our state's economy. If you go to the next slide, the bottom fell out for obviously the state. We lost 345,000 jobs in our state almost overnight. And you can imagine the impact that has on families, on individual citizens, and certainly on the overall economy. We saw it in our consumer spending, which just dried up by a third just about in that springtime of 2020. It's hurting small businesses. It obviously is hurting communities. Many of the local governments in particular who depend on that local government tax revenue, the sales taxes, obviously all of this was hurting. But the backbone of any economy is a small business. In fact, something to the tune of nearly 80% of all the jobs in our state are in a small business. Those, that's where most people are working. And our state small businesses, the revenues dropped by nearly half, again, almost overnight. And so that was kind of the backdrop of where it is. I know the pandemic and the economic recession it caused affected different industries in different ways. And so this probably is not earth-shattering news to the folks on this call, but I thought it was worth kind of just level setting of really where we were in the spring. So if you can go to the next slide. The good news is that we're actually in the leading tier of states across the country in terms of the recovery. 63% of those 345,000 jobs that we lost have come back. So just tremendous job growth across the state. We have seen that start to slow down. For those of you who follow the jobs news every month, the latest jobs report from the national level, the federal government's jobs report shows that we're kind of seeing job growth returning to what we consider to be replacement level. So really kind of just flat job growth. But that is on the heels of several months of really strong job growth recovering from the pandemic. We talk a lot about it in our organization at the Department of Economic Development and across the administration as the state recovers from COVID-19, both on the public health side as well as the economic side. It's really two sides of the same coin. And so as we've seen cases rise into the late fall and to the early, kind of as we expect in the early winter, we've seen that job growth level off. But again, as you look at the entire, the entire economy, and as you look at the rest of the country, if you can go to the next slide, 63% of our jobs have come back. That's 16th in the nation, best in the nation for the recovery of those jobs. So obviously, we still have citizens who are hurting. We have citizens who are on unemployment as a result of COVID-19. But as you look at Missouri's situation relative to other states in the country, there's only 15 states that have recovered the jobs faster than we have. And I think that speaks really to the diversity of our economy to begin with. Missouri has an extremely diverse economy. We don't have all of our eggs in one basket, so to speak. But that diversity, as well as, frankly, the balanced public policy approach that we've taken, I think has helped our state and the economy bounce back, more directly on that. If you take another look, if you go to the next slide, take another look at a key metric for us, because this has been a big topic of conversation. It's not just the jobs overall, but it's sort of the share of everybody that's working. And, we dropped 4.4% in our employment levels since the pandemic started. And so, again, it's not just the number of jobs that we're losing, or that we did lose, it's literally the overall levels. And this is kind of more of a relative measure. But again, if you look at the next slide, again, we're 16th best in the nation here as well for the return to employment levels. So the two things together, one is the actual jobs and recovering, and the other is kind of the return to your pre-COVID jobs levels, I think speaks to, again, the resiliency of our economy, certainly. Now, we know, and I'll show some slides here in a little bit, that there's still some spots in our economy that are struggling, and predominantly, we know that they're in the small businesses that are related to tourism in particular, and leisure and hospitality. But if you can go to the next slide, one of the things that I think shows, again, positive news as well, is that as the economy, early part of the spring, as we all stayed at home and were hunkering down, we stopped going to stores and stopped shopping and things like that, and consumer spending just bottomed out. I think if you go to the next slide, we can see some data around that. The three lines you're seeing here, the orange line shows consumer spending in Missouri and the changes since January. Green is retail with grocery, and purple is restaurants and hotels. And so you can see just the tremendous variation within different sectors of our economy. But one thing I would note is we really kind of returned to pre-COVID levels of consumer spending, again, which is a key driver of the economy. And for those who remember your economics 101 courses in high school and in college, you know that consumer spending makes up the lion's share of the GDP overall. And so when consumer spending for us returns to that pre-COVID level this summer, that was a really positive news for businesses, for the economy overall. And you can kind of see how that hovered really on a positive side for the better part of the summer and in the fall. And then as, again, the cases started to pile up again, you could see that it ticked back down. And right now we're at about -5% on consumer spending relative to January. So we're down 5% from where we started the year. But again, that restaurant and hotel is a completely different story within that sector, 30% down, as everybody has changed behaviors. We're not going out to eat. We're shopping at home, or shopping and eating at home and things like that. So there's a lot of variation within our economy. But we look at this weekly, and you can see, again, the changes here. You can go to the next slide, please. Small businesses, this is kind of the same story here, but small businesses, the revenue has decreased by almost half since the start of the pandemic, or at the height of the pandemic, I should say. It was this is the trough, 46% down. If you go to the next slide, you can kind of see the data here a little bit more at granular level. It's a very similar story to consumer spending, as you might expect. The dark blue line in the middle is the total small business revenue for the state small businesses. But that leisure and hospitality sector, the very bottom line, is still down -53%. They were down almost 70%, just catastrophic for that sector early on. We'll talk a little bit later here today about some of the resources that we've put into the field to assist these issues. But one of the key focus areas we've had, frankly, has been on the tourism sector because of what you're seeing right here. And in communities like Branson, certainly have felt the impacts of this at the height of it, of the recession, and back in the spring. One out of every four Missourians in Taney County, a quarter of the population was on unemployment at the height of the pandemic. They had 25% unemployment in Taney County, which is where Branson is, at the depths of this earlier this spring. So massive implications, not just for the economy certainly, but for people's lives and their livelihoods. And so it's just been a tremendous year for small businesses, and they've really weathered it as you go. So we'll continue to track on this. Again, I would note, as the virus has ticked up, the lines for these measures has also gone down. I mean, it is almost a direct inverse of the virus chart and then the economic chart, two sides of the same coin, as we say. Can you go to the next slide, please? Similarly here, this is businesses that are open. So the last one was revenue, and it's a very strongly correlated here, of course, but we're still down about 20% of the total businesses have not returned. Total small businesses have not returned since January. And I'm personally, this is kind of my read on it at this point, but I think we're probably going to be hovering around this level until the vaccine, which is coming, of course, as we all know, but until that's widely distributed and widely available, I think we're going to continue to see this sort of hovering at this level as we've basically held here over the course of the pandemic as well. And then again, the latest trend downward here is not good. But again, as you see more restrictions coming in place, the virus surges, this has a direct effect on our state's economy as well. If you go to the next slide. So the last thing I'd note before I kind of talk a little bit about what are we kind of doing about all of this is one of the other metrics that we track is mobility. And so through data that's available publicly, it's actually online. You can get it, but you can see a direct cause and effect when the virus ticks up. Different policies are implemented at the local level. People's mobility drops off pretty rapidly, which means they're staying at home, they're not going out, which is exactly what we want, frankly, from a public health perspective, so they don't go out and spread the disease. But you can see it all play out. I would encourage you to take a look at, if you're at all interested in the data, showmestrong.mo.gov. We've got pretty much all the data sets that I walk through here, but also links to additional ones if you're at all interested in taking a look at that and spending some time on it on your own. Showmestrong.mo.gov. You can find a lot more to it, but it's really interesting to see kind of how this has played out. And we've really tried to follow the data as we've developed the state's response, both on the public health side, but also on the economic side. So if you can go to the next slide, we can talk a little bit about some of the things that we've done so far this year to help try to help our private sector weather the storm and, frankly, to move forward beyond that. I know many of the folks on this call, not everybody certainly, but many of the organizations that are involved with MEI have interest in or work that you do that relates to broadband internet. And I think probably more than any event that we could have anticipated, we've all learned why and how internet access is just literally critical. It's now, we all know that, but I think this has shown it in every aspect of our lives and probably exposed some of the weaker areas as it relates to broadband access and availability, but also just shows how truly dependent we are and forever will be on that. You know that Governor Parson, kind of in line with our prioritization on infrastructure development, has really looked at broadband internet as a key priority. We at the Department of Economic Development work very closely with our colleagues in the Department of Agriculture, and I know that Tim Arbeiter, who is the state's Director of Broadband Development on our team, has presented to this group before. But all told, we looked at about a $50 million injection of funding for broadband expansion, broadband access during the pandemic. These are using the state's CARES Act funding, and this does not include, what some local governments have done on their own. But we kind of looked at a perspective, not just kind of one piece of the puzzle here. Tried to be as broad, if you'll pardon the pun, as we possibly could be for expanding internet access and high-speed internet access. So the Emergency Broadband Investment Grant, we'll talk about that in just a little bit, is really to, kind of an extension of the state's broadband program prior to the pandemic, which was really helping to assist internet providers expand the infrastructure to underserved and unserved areas. But we also know that because of staffing issues or because of just the public health nature of the situation that our state is in, we needed to increase telehealth access. So you can see that we allocated funding to buy almost, over 12,000 hotspots for use at the federally qualified health centers and community medical centers to increase the opportunities for people to do telehealth checks. So you don't have to go to the doctor, cuts down on the travel certainly, but also enhances the opportunities for folks. Very same way with libraries. Libraries in many rural communities are kind of the central hub where people can go to get internet access if they don't have it readily available. And so we tried to expand their use of Wi-Fi enabled devices, laptops, hotspots and the like to make those available in their communities. We also work very closely with our partners at DESE, the K-12 department, as well as higher ed, to make sure that our K-12 sector, as well as our universities and colleges, were able to get some funding assistance to expand and upgrade their capabilities. Obviously, that was a challenge before the pandemic, and we know certainly now we need those students to continue learning. My son is homeschooling this week, and I know that if we didn't have that internet access at our house, it'd be literally impossible for him to do that. I am very anxious for him to go back in person tomorrow, though, I'll tell you that. And then finally, we're also working with the U.S. Economic Development Administration for some additional grants for additional engineering studies and the like. Missouri has been fortunate. We have some outstanding congressional delegation members in D.C. Senator Roy Blunt, in particular, has been a tremendous leader for us in accessing federal funds. Missouri has received hundreds of millions of dollars, probably more than that, actually, when you add them all up, but in broadband funds. But we wanted to continue to pour resources into this as well. So this is just one piece of how we're doing that. If you could go to the next slide, please. This kind of gives you just a snippet of one of those programs. This is the one specifically for the provider awards. You can see a little bit of that map there. This is part of that $3.8 million for that. And then you can kind of see how it's distributed across the state. Go next slide. So zooming out from broadband, we've also tried to take a pretty comprehensive look at our economic relief programs. And if you heard the governor talk about this, we spent a fair amount of time in May really kind of outlining this publicly, and then have spent the months since then implementing and administering a lot of these programs. But we really targeted our economic recovery efforts on a couple of key pillars, if you want to call it that. Citizens, obviously, communities, and businesses. And we tried to target our assistance in those kind of three areas. We talked a little bit about the broadband already, but a key sector in the state's economy, but also just a key sector for delivering services to citizens and the public is our nonprofit community. And one of the things that we had to do early on as a result of the revenue situation and the pressures that were put on the state government and the state budget is we had to, basically stop utilizing some of our nonprofit and community development tax credit programs that DED administers. And so we wanted to offset the impact of that with some of these CARES Act funding. So we had a nonprofit relief and recovery program utilizing CARES Act funding to kind of plug that hole, $22 million, nearly 200 separate and individual nonprofit organizations. Same with co-working and incubators. So helping businesses start up. Missouri Technology Corporation was a key partner in this, $1 million to help, companies and in incubators. So, universities, there are other ones that have kind of these co-working spaces for businesses as well to kind of set up shop and start there. Wanted to provide some resources on that front. The legislature also set aside some funding for family-owned farms. Obviously, the Department of Agriculture is a great partner for our department, but it's also a key part of our state's economy, as everybody knows. And so we wanted to target some assistance to family-owned farms. PPE production is another really important one. One of the things, and the governor has talked about this quite a bit, is early in the pandemic, everybody knows how hard it was to get the PPE that we needed. It was partly because the demand was so increased, but also because of the disruptions in the supply chains, not just in the United States, but around the world. And so the governor really made a commitment to enhance our state's own production of PPE within Missouri. And so we created an incentive program to help manufacturers, Missouri manufacturers, start producing PPE if they were not able to do so before. They weren't even in that line of business before. So we had nearly 50 new manufacturers come online. They had to retool, they had to buy new equipment, and they're actively producing PPE. And the state, as a result of this, has been able to basically develop a stockpile of these critical medical supplies to help not just in the current pandemic, but to build up a stockpile if we need them again. Governor's key lesson here is that he was never going to be, reliant on foreign supply chains for this kind of critical public safety equipment, and wanted us to really target some resources here. So we did. Meat and poultry grant, meat and poultry processing grant. Obviously, these companies, if you remember back to kind of midsummer or late spring, there were very serious concerns about the availability of protein within our food supply. And it was because these organizations were having tremendous difficulties keeping workers in. They were having folks go down. They had to really retool their entire plants in order to keep workers safe. And if they went down, then literally we would be in jeopardy of not having food. And obviously that is a challenge for a variety of reasons. But it was teetering on the edge back at that point. And I know it's in retrospect, things have kind of, they've worked out in many ways, but at the time it was teetering on the edge. There were, where there was very serious concern about, producers who were going to have to slaughter their hogs because there was nowhere to get them processed and things like that. And so the Department of Agriculture has put some resources into that to help these meat and poultry processors really beef up that side of it. The last two that I want to mention here, because I think they're really important to our economy, is the Tourism Destination Marketing Organization grant. So just about, everybody on this call lives in a county or lives in an area that has a tourism organization, and they're primarily charged with marketing and advertising for your community or for our state's tourism economy. You saw in the data just on small businesses alone, the impact that this has had on small businesses, revenue, as well as consumer behavior. But the tourism economy is critically important to our state. What we wanted to do was to make sure that travelers knew that there were ways to come to Missouri to spend tourism dollars, but to do so safely. And so what we did was we focused our marketing efforts in the Division of Tourism and with our Convention and Visitors Bureau partners locally to try to market these opportunities to come and do it safely. So, for example, instead of coming to a large venue, come to one of the state parks in the area and enjoy safely outside. We also provided some funding for, PPE equipment and materials for events that needed it. And then finally, the Small Business Grant Program. We had just a tremendous interest in this program, as you could imagine. 800 some odd small businesses that are vying for the $22 million that were available. And we have about a week and a half left for these programs to be wrapped up. As you may know, the Federal CARES Act is set to expire. The funding is set to go away on December 30th. So we're literally right at the end of that time. And so teams all across state government, certainly within our department at DED, are furiously reviewing applications and going back and forth with applicants to try to get those funds out the door to the people that need them. And so it's a flurry of activity, but these are the main core programs that we've enacted on the CARES Act side. Again, it's really developed to plug the holes that were left by the pandemic, and really to assist those folks that were in greatest need. If you go to the next slide, please. This is a measure here that I wanted to share with you. Really has nothing to do with the CARES Act or the pandemic itself, but I just wanted to give you a snapshot of where we're at in terms of our overall economic development activity. So we call them projects, but these are companies that are actively looking at relocating or expanding in our state at any given time that we're working with. So it obviously doesn't capture all economic activity, but it captures the ones that are working with an economic development organization. And we're basically double where we were at last year in terms of the active opportunities looking at creating jobs and creating capital investment in our state. You can see the numbers of jobs here and the number of capital investment, but we're literally double, in some cases more than that, from last year. And so one of the things that we've seen, which it was kind of surprising and almost surreal as we went throughout the year, but there were a fair number of these projects that were initiated during the pandemic. And we kind of thought that, we'd maybe, work on a couple of them that we're finishing up, or, we're at that point where they were able to weather the storm, but surely there'd be no new interest and things would dry up on that front. But actually, to the contrary, we've seen increased interest in the state. One key sector in particular that you may have seen some announcements in the news are in kind of like the e-commerce and distribution facilities. We announced a project with over 1,000 jobs in Belton, Missouri, just outside of Kansas City, for Chewy.com, which is a direct e-tailer for pet food. They're the largest pet product, pet care, pet store type online presence in the entire world. But they have a distribution center now in the Kansas City area. Amazon announced a 1 million square foot distribution center in Republic, which is in Greene County, just outside of Springfield. And so we've seen some changes in the projects that we're working on, but manufacturing projects are still very, very strong, as well as these distribution opportunities as well. We've not had any, as you can imagine, back office or office or corporate office setting type companies that have initiated during the pandemic. And I think it still remains to be seen what happens when people aren't going to the office and they're working from home, like I am and many of the people on the call are right now. And so we'll see what the dynamics are in that regard and what the long-term implications are. But I wanted to show you this because I think this is a really encouraging slide for us. This is our project pipeline. None of these have announced yet; they're still in the works. But when your warm leads and hot leads, to use a sales metaphor, when you've got more of them, you're going to be able to convert more to the close. And so I'm excited about that, and it's really showing some strength. You can go to the last couple slides here. I'll wrap up and be happy to take any questions. I wanted to share this as well because one of the things that our team has really been focused on this year, economic development professionals at DED have been asked to do many things that go far, far afield of economic development. And we've been working very closely with other agencies and state government, with our partners in the Department of Health and others, to really help our state respond, not just to the economic side, which is what you'd probably expect us to be working on, but we've also been engaged on the public health side. So our team has put together what we call the Show Me You Care campaign. Hopefully you've seen it. If you've listened to streaming radio, Pandora, Spotify, those kind of things, maybe you've seen some billboards, but we've really tried to target some of these messages to our greatest risk or highest need type populations, folks who might not otherwise encounter some of these public health messages. But we've been putting this out. Would encourage you, if you're at all interested, to take a look at these and how your industry or your organization can get involved. But showmestrong.mo.gov. You can engage with us more. But I just really wanted to show you this because I'm proud of our team. We've used our team's economic development marketing expertise and put it to a public health angle. So if you can go to the next slide. And I think this is my last slide. I wanted to wrap up with something that we've all been waiting for the better part of a year now, which is the vaccine. And so you all know this, I'm sure, but we are anticipating the arrival of the batch of the vaccine here very soon. The governor has talked about this. We're expecting to initiate our phase 1 of this, the vaccine rollout here shortly. Wanted to point you in the direction. We've got a website at the very bottom here, mostopscovid.com. mostopscovid.com. This is the state of Missouri's vaccine distribution plan. And you can see that we've included, essential categories here. Energy workers are considered to be in that initial phase, the initial prioritization, because of obviously the work that you do is so critical to keeping the lights on, literally and figuratively, in our economy. And so if you haven't had a chance to take a look at that, please do. We're also planning some public information efforts over the next few days into next week that will talk a little bit more about this to some of the early phase organizations. So much more to come on this. I did want to highlight this and make sure that you were aware of the website if you had some questions about it. But a really resource that is put out by our public health team, what I think answers a lot of the questions and tries to dispel a lot of the myths and rumors about the vaccine. Like, for example, no one is going to be putting a chip or anything like that in your body. It's truly a vaccine for the virus. And so there's all kinds of information on there, including some of those, those greatest hit rumors and myths to be dispelled in case anybody's interested in some of those. But please do check out. There's some implications for your industry, and I want to make sure that you're aware of it. And we'll be happy to get the word out as well early next week about the availability of those information sessions and webinars that we'll be having on the vaccine itself. So that's the update that I have for you today. I just want to wrap up and say thank you so much for the support that you have shown to our state government team as an organization, but also thanks so much for the individual members of MEI for your support over the course of this year. It's been a challenging year on a variety of fronts, but I am proud of the men and women that work at the State Department of Economic Development. I hope you are too. And you should be proud of them because they get up every day and want to do what they can to serve you and serve you better. So thanks for your support, but I'd be happy to take any questions or discuss anything further that you'd like, Josh, with the remaining time that we have.
I appreciate that, Rob. Thank you. You never disappoint. Always great information. I greatly appreciate it. And no, this has not been an easy year for anybody, and especially when the economy's been taking a hit. I know you guys have been working overtime trying to keep Missouri moving. There have been a number of great successes this year within your own department and with the Missouri Partnership, and who I know you work with to bring in new companies even during this time. So thank you. And you're right there. Our board is very supportive of the work you do, and will continue to be. And don't ever hesitate to reach out to us if we can be of help.
Thank you.
I don't see any questions that have come in so far, and I'll be honest, all the questions I had that I wanted to ask you hit on. So I think that's great. I guess when you look at the broadband part, the announcement came in with the funding. In your mind, how quickly, what's the timeline to be able to get that out there, where you're getting shovels in the ground type thing?
Yeah, and hopefully we put out some information that the Department of Agriculture did as well on that. And I know Senator Blunt's office put that out. That's the most recent, the FCC announcement on it. But the funds that we're putting out for the CARES Act dollars, they're going out now. Most of those are already out because of the timelines that we've got. So we're wrapping that up, and then we'll shift over to that. Actually, the FCC, the federal government, will be the ones that are administering those dollars. We hope to see those in the field soon. We'll look at, we're getting ready to start in January with the legislative session ahead of us, and I'm sure broadband funding will be another topic of discussion, as it always is in the state's budget again. And so the state, through DED, we've had a $5 million broadband grant program that we did have to, pause because of budget concerns. And so it's, funding is going to be a challenge going forward. The thing that I think we have to look at is what's the right mix between federal and state funds. I want to make sure, that if the state of Missouri is getting a significant amount of federal funds that we're not kind of overlapping. And that's been a lot of what the work that Tim Arbeiter has been doing, is to make sure that they're targeted to those communities that are not receiving the federal dollars. So there's a lot that goes into that. I know it's a long-winded answer to a short question, but the CARES Act dollars, that's where our priority is right now, to get those out within the next 2 weeks, basically.
So we did have one question here from Eleni Bickle, and that is, which action would be most beneficial economically for Missourians if funding was not a constraint?
So at the risk of sounding like I'm pandering to my boss, the governor, it's continuing to double down on workforce development and infrastructure. Likes to talk about new incentive programs and kind of those types of things. But if we really focus on training workers and attracting new people to come here and retaining our talent, solving that workforce issue, the skills and availability piece is like job number one. And it's really a lot of why we targeted the reorganization of state government that happened about a year and a half ago with the Department of Higher Ed and our department around that. And then, infrastructure is going to continue to be, I think, the big thorny funding problem that we have as a state have to look at. There's upgrades that need to happen. There's new technologies that are being implemented. There's just maintenance and upkeep of existing, and I'm talking the gamut of infrastructure. Obviously, energy infrastructure, but road transportation, rivers, ports, all of those things. And so those are the two areas, the two pillars that we have to focus on. Missouri has a long history of being a pro-growth, pro-jobs, kind of low regulation, low cost, low risk state. And that has actually served us well in terms of being a place that's attractive for business. But we have to continue to focus on those two pillars. Like I said, the one thing that we've been looking at is where do we stack up relative to our competitor states. And we really were falling behind over the last decade or so. The silver lining, and I hate to even say it like this, but the silver lining, if there is one, in terms of the economic trauma that's happening this year, is that Missouri is leapfrogging ahead of other states. When we're 16th in the nation in jobs recovery, that positions us much farther down the line than a lot of the other states around us. And if we can capitalize on, again, the relative position between us and some of our other states, it's going to help us into the future. And again, I feel kind of ghoulish talking about it like that, but we do need to capitalize on the opportunity that Missouri has. And I think if we stay focused on workforce and infrastructure, we'll be in good shape.
Well, Rob, thank you for all that you're doing. Keep up the great work. Keep us in mind if we can be of any help. But thank you for
likewise. Thank you so much. Thank
Absolutely.
you. Take care.
So as you all heard, we had several comments earlier today discussing the Grainbelt Express transmission project being developed in Missouri, along with Kansas and Illinois and Indiana, I believe. And there have been some new developments there. So we thought we'd bring back the folks from Grainbelt Express, and Nicole Lucky, who's the Vice President of Regulatory Affairs with Invenergy, is here to share with us about the status of the project, how things are going, and the value and those type of things. Nicole, how are you?
I'm well, Josh. Thanks for the invitation. I'm so excited to be here today to provide an update on the tremendous economic impact of the Grainbelt Express transmission line project on the state of Missouri. As Josh said, my name is Nicole Lucky. I'm the Vice President of Regulatory Affairs for Invenergy LLC. Although I was an Illinois Commerce Commission staffer in my previous life, so it was really nice to see Chair Zalewski this morning and hear how our was faring at ICC. Next slide. So for those of you who aren't yet familiar with our company, Invenergy is headquartered in Chicago and has been developing sustainable energy solutions since 2001. Though our executive team has been working together in the energy space for almost 30 years. Since it was founded, Invenergy has under contract, under construction, or in operation 101 utility scale wind projects totaling more than 15 gigawatts of generation, 36 solar projects totaling almost 4 gigawatts generation, 16 utility scale battery storage projects totaling 896 megawatt hours and 300 megawatts, and 12 natural gas projects totaling 5.6 gigawatts of generation. So the company is fairly technology agnostic, but of course only developing what makes sense in the market today, which is trending towards a low to no carbon footprint. Invenergy has a couple different arms of the company. You can see here at the bottom of the slide. We have a services arm of the company, which includes a large number of experts. And these are the folks that do the day-to-day operational work for our assets, whether we continue to own them or continue to operate them on behalf of our utility customers. We do also have a clean water arm working on desalination solutions in Texas, and a venture capital arm called Energize Ventures that invests in digital solutions to improve the performance of clean energy technologies. Now, while most folks think of Invenergy as a generation company, we have had to build over 400 miles of high voltage transmission and over 2,200 miles of distribution level transmission simply to interconnect our own projects. So this is part of what made Green Belt Express to appeal to our company, and a large part why I feel so confident in our ability to execute on the project's development. Next slide. So I think it's really important to look at, well, that's definitely not Greenbelt. I think it's really important to look at the project as a whole, right? When we're talking about it, I think a lot of people have seen the route through Missouri, but perhaps not the entire project. This is an 800-mile long high voltage direct current transmission line. It starts in western Kansas, it goes up through Missouri, where it's designed to drop off some of its power, and then continues through Illinois into Indiana, where the remainder of the line's power will be delivered into the energy market there called PJM. Next slide. The route as approved by the Missouri Public Service Commission can be seen here. It's routed through 8 Missouri counties. These are the counties that will see the tremendous amount of economic activity and opportunity around the development of the Green Belt Express project over the next couple of years. Next slide. So the maps depicted on this slide do a really good job of summarizing why Green Belt Express makes a lot of sense. It's no secret that the best wind resource in the United States is located in western Kansas. And as you can see from the map on the right, actually, western Kansas also has a really excellent solar resource. And getting access to the best resource means that you end up significantly lowering the cost of the energy that is produced by your wind or solar project. So if I'm spending the same amount of money on my installed capacity, on my actual equipment, but I'm generating more megawatt hours or widgets or whatever you want to call them, that means each one I generate is less expensive. And in the case of Kansas, the resource is many times more efficient and less expensive than similar resources in Missouri, Illinois, and Indiana. Now, I'll note that in order to decarbonize our electricity system along the timeline that many investors and customers are pushing their utilities to follow, we're going to need these types of projects everywhere via Grain Belt and locally. So this is not an either or proposition, this is an and proposition. But Grain Belt is going to help to significantly lower the cost of that power for ratepayers in states where the energy will be delivered, like Missouri. So the current problem is, because the best renewable resources and the most open land for siting them, because wind and solar resources do require quite a bit of land, these resources are located far away from population centers. So we have to build transmission lines to access them. The existing infrastructure in these areas, because they're sparsely populated areas, just isn't there. So think of it like building an interstate highway system or new rail infrastructure in the sky. Just like the interstate highway system provides consumers with access to low-cost goods by sourcing them from where they're most cost-effectively produced, like Florida oranges or Pacific Northwest lumber products, transmission like Grain Belt is designed to deliver consumers electricity from where it's most affordably produced. So given the way that joint transmission planning agreements are structured, and we heard Chair Silby talk this morning about some of the efforts on the seams between markets, it would be impossible to see a project like Grain Belt come through traditional RTO planning processes. SVP, MISO, and PJM, the 3 markets that the project runs through, 2 of which Missouri is in, have very different transmission planning processes that are inconsistent with different planning assumptions and timelines. Now, there's certainly a push from stakeholders and from federal offices like the DOE for multi-state HVDC projects like this. But to date, that has not resulted in any projects like Grainbelt being built. But we do need to be thinking about this as a country. Having an electricity system that is interconnected and features geographically diverse resources is critical to maintaining the reliability and security of our electricity system, especially as we have more renewable generation coming online. So the sun is not always shining and the wind is not always blowing at the same time everywhere across the country. The more interconnected our system is, the more we have access to these resources when we need them and at the lowest cost. I think I could probably talk on the topic of the need for transmission forever, but I know we want to dig into the economic benefits piece of this project. So stick with me for a little bit longer and we will get into that. Next slide. So why is Grainbelt Express a direct current versus typical alternating current line? Well, this slide mostly speaks for itself, but DC lines are just more efficient at moving large amounts of power long distances, and Grainbelt is designed to carry 4,000 megawatts of generation. You have fewer line losses than you do with AC lines, which again helps to ensure that you're delivering energy at the lowest cost. There are definitely also operational and reliability benefits associated with DC lines versus AC lines. But in addition, DC lines use a narrower right of way and fewer conductors than comparable AC lines, making more efficient use of transmission corridors and minimizing visual and land use impacts, which I know is a priority to the landowners, to local county officials, and to elected officials in those areas. Because the existing system is primarily AC, DC lines require converter stations, which you can see pictured here on this slide, to convert the power from DC to alternating current. Now, this is not a new technology. In fact, DC technology has been around since the inception of our electricity grid. Many folks might already be familiar with the battle between Edison and Westinghouse over AC and DC, but in any case, there are 16 HVDC lines operating in North America today. The Pacific DC intertie between the Pacific Northwest and Los Angeles is probably the most notable in the United States. And there are many more under construction or operating across the world. Next slide. So I wanted to make sure folks understood a little bit of history about the project. Development began back in 2011 under Clean Line Energy Partners, and the project went through extensive rounds of stakeholder meetings, public inputs, and regulatory approvals. So this project's been in the public domain for a long time, and Invenergy stepped in to manage the development of Grainbelt in late 2018 and closed on its acquisition of the project in 2019. So we have now received unanimous regulatory approvals in 3 of the 4 project states, and we're planning to pursue approvals in Illinois in 2021. And I want to be really clear about, some of what I heard this morning. The project was deemed a public utility by these commissions, just like the Amerens and the Evergys of the world. This is a public utility building this transmission line through these states. Next slide. So starting at a macro level and coming to the meat of our economic development discussion, through an agreement with the Missouri Joint Municipal Electricity Utility Commission, or MUJMUC, because that's a very long name, Missouri ratepayers in 39 cities are already expected to save $12.8 million annually on their electricity costs. To the right is a map that shows how these savings will be felt all across the state of Missouri. They are not focused in just one area, they're spread across the state, across many different cities. And as you can see from the table of the top 10 cities by savings, some of these smaller cities are looking at over $1 million in electricity savings a year. So this is a significant savings for these utilities and for their customers. In addition, what we've heard from many of the Missouri stakeholders since Invenergy became involved in the project in 2018 is that Missouri wants more of the power. 500 megawatts is not enough. So through our existing regulatory approvals, we've committed to building a converter station that's capable of delivering at least 500 megawatts from the project to Missouri. Earlier this year, we asked an independent third-party consultant called PA Consulting to run a study to determine the economic feasibility of delivering at least half of the power to Missouri. That study showed that not only was this economically feasible, but with expanded delivery to Missouri, Grainbelt could deliver Missouri IOU customers billions of dollars in electricity savings over the next 20 years. So I would encourage folks to go to our website where the study overview is posted to review the results, but we felt that was pretty stunning. Of course, to the extent we needed to alter the design of the project to allow for this expanded delivery, including enlarging the converter station, we would have to go back to the KCC and the Missouri Public Service Commission for approval. I think most folks know that one of the largest costs that commercial and industrial customers shoulder is their energy cost. So we know that access to low-cost energy is a way for Missouri to attract new energy-intensive businesses like manufacturing and data centers, which is where we're seeing a lot of economic growth now. In addition, many commercial customers also have sustainability goals, and getting access to low-cost energy that is also renewable is another carrot to expand existing or attract new businesses to set up shop in Missouri. So there are a number of companies with sustainability goals that have already, established a presence in Missouri. 3M, Cargill, Dow, General Mills, GM, IKEA, Microsoft, Nestle, Nike, Procter & Gamble. I could go on and on and on. So this is an incredible economic development tool for the state. Next slide. But it's about more than just energy cost savings for Missouri. Our third-party consultant, Strategic Economic Research, that did the economic impact analysis that served as the basis for our approvals at the Missouri Public Service Commission, ran that economic impact analysis for the project, assuming this increased delivery in the state. And the outcome is a significant increase in the total investment in Missouri, $1.25 billion in investment, as well as an increase in jobs. So here you see the direct, indirect, and induced jobs expected over the 3-year construction period is 2,500 jobs on an annual basis. So a massive amount of work expected when this project starts construction, and $250 million in worker earnings on an annual basis over this 3-year period, which of course will end up going back into the Missouri economy. In addition, we would expect 220 direct, indirect, and induced permanent jobs once the project is operational, with an additional 15 million in annual worker earnings for the life of the project. So just for clarity, when I say direct jobs, those are workers directly involved in the construction and maintenance of the project. Indirect jobs are supported through supply chain purchases for materials like wire, steel, and aggregate that are sourced through the state. And induced jobs are those jobs that result from higher spending from direct and indirect workers. Next slide. So at the more micro county and landowner level, landowners along the route in Missouri will receive $35 million in landowner payments, which is critical at a time when commodity prices are low and people may be experiencing economic hardship due to coronavirus-related impacts on the economy. And just to be clear here, just based on what I heard this morning, the project is seeking an easement from landowners, and an easement does not grant the company any ownership of the land. Landowners retain full ownership of their land and can continue to use the land and the easement in any manner that does not interfere with the safe construction and operation of the transmission line. So I want to make sure we don't characterize this or mischaracterize this as the company taking away folks' property. In addition, the compensation structure for the easements is more generous than what has historically been offered for similar easements in Missouri. So state budgets are tight right now. I think that's happening across the country, but during construction, Grain Belt will pay approximately $25 million in sales and other taxes. And at the local level, Grain Belt will pay out $260 million in property taxes over the life of the project to counties, schools, ambulance districts, and road districts. So really important services that need adequate funding to serve their communities. Last but certainly not least, and I think this is starting to be kind of a theme today, we are required to install fiber optic cable on the line for our own communications purposes, but we've pledged to expand this fiber to create a broadband backbone infrastructure along the Grain Belt route. So then we would seek to partner with local ISPs to extend the service along that last mile. So we all know what a critical economic development tool broadband service can be, and many of the counties that Grain Belt is routed through are currently underserved. Added to that, we're all doing a virtual meeting today, right? So remote work in schools become the norm. So it's clear more than ever how much this has become a critical service that Grain Belt can bring to project communities in Missouri. Next slide. So Invenergy started title work at the beginning of this year, and voluntary easement acquisition is currently underway in Kansas and Missouri, which we're really excited about. We do have land agents out in the field. Landowners have received their easement offers. Just like any other company that's operating during this time, we've had to be really careful about navigating safety protocols, making sure that we're keeping landowners safe as we're doing this work, and we're keeping our agents safe as well. So that slowed us down a little bit at the beginning of the year, but we've ramped it up since then. So that work is underway. In addition, engineering, design, and environmental field studies are ongoing so that we can hopefully begin site work in mid-2022 and bring the project online by the end of 2024. Next slide. So we are so glad to have the support of a number of organizations and companies across the project route, including labor, manufacturing, consumer advocates, the Kansas Farm Bureau, and others. And we're so excited about the positive economic impact the project will have on the state of Missouri. So that's all I have prepared for today, but I'd be happy to take any questions that folks have.
Thank you so much. Robert Scott asked, would you comment on the natural resources and environmental impacts related to the project and how you plan to mitigate those?
Yeah, so just like any other large infrastructure project, we are required, like I said, to do environmental field studies. So we'll be assessing the potential impact on bats, wetlands, and cultural artifacts. And we'll be working with the SHPOs and other state and federal agencies that are required to review the potential impacts of the project on Missouri and the other states in the region.
Okay. Chuck Dale Dirks asks, what voltage is the DC transmission line?
600 kV.
Okay.
That's an easy answer.
And then do you know exactly where the converter stations will be?
Yeah, right now, under our approved route at the Missouri Public Service Commission, it's located in Rawls County.
Rawls County, is that what you said?
That's right.
Okay. Is there a federal regulator engaged in the project, overseeing it in any way?
Yeah, absolutely. So on the energy side, in terms of regulating the price that we charge for service, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is certainly engaged. We will have to, once we negotiate our agreements with our off-takers, FERC actually has to approve each and every one of those agreements as being just and reasonable. So FERC has jurisdiction over the rates that are charged on the line. And then in addition to that, of course, we're working with the Army Corps of Engineers on the river crossings, and there are federal agencies that are involved in the environmental permitting aspect of the project as well.
Okay, great. There's a question that says, where are converter stations to be located in the PA study?
In the same location as in our approved Missouri Public Service Commission route.
Okay, great. Nice, quick, easy questions for you, right?
Yeah, the PA study just did an analysis of the impacts on the energy markets that Missouri sits in. Didn't do any impact on routing impacts of the expanded delivery in Missouri.
Okay. Is there a FERC license required?
So the project already has gotten approval from FERC to negotiate rates. So they have something called Negotiated Rate Authority. It's not just a clever name. And then, like I said, FERC will be required to approve any rates that we negotiate. So we have the authority to go out and negotiate them, and then FERC will review those agreements and also approve them, we hope.
So and I apologize if you had said this before, during your presentation there, but what are your thoughts on when you think you'll be starting to deliver power?
Yeah, so our goal is to have the project online by the end of 2024. Of course, like I said, COVID has impacted our development efforts just like many other businesses. But luckily, building things outside and doing construction work is pretty COVID proof. So we're still moving forward with all of our development efforts and keeping our eyes on that end of 2024 COD.
And have you done shovels in ground anywhere?
No, so we are actually not permitted to install any structures until we have received approvals from all 4 states. And in terms of shovels on the ground, I mean, the only thing that we would be doing now is there may be some digging required for environmental studies, but we'd be required to get permission from landowners for that.
Gotcha. And where do you think, what are the hurdles there in Illinois, or where do you think the projections for Illinois are?
So I'm really optimistic about Illinois. We have a couple different options. So as Chair Zalewski noted, there is an energy omnibus bill that is being created in the state in response to Governor Pritzker's 8 energy principles. We'll certainly be engaged in that process and looking for a fix to our regulatory hurdle that we have in the state right now. That's probably the cleanest path towards getting approval at the ICC. Again, we still need to present our case to the ICC, but being able to go and do that is a challenge right now. So the Illinois Supreme Court issued a decision a couple of years ago on a separate project, not on Grain Belt, saying that really only folks that own utility plant that is currently serving customers can apply for a certificate to build utility plant to serve customers, right? So it's sort of a chicken and egg problem. So we would be looking to fix that either through this energy omnibus bill, or potentially we could simply acquire a piece of utility plant from a muni or a co-op or some other entity in Illinois that is serving customers and use that as the basis to qualify us to go back to the ICC and seek our CPCN, it's called there, our Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity. That's certainly a riskier route. You know, there's no telling what will be acceptable to the ICC and to the courts. So, you know, a legislative change is certainly a cleaner way to accomplish that. But like I said, we have lots of options open to us, and we're really optimistic about moving forward with that in 2021.
Great. Kim Goodnight asks, are you required to work with incumbent utilities, or in the other states? You've talked about the municipal utilities in Missouri. How are you working with incumbent utilities?
So we obviously cannot force our project on anyone, right? So the incumbent utilities are certainly the folks we're talking to about taking service on the project, but they have to really carefully weigh their options, right? Does it make more sense for their ratepayers or for reliability for them to have locally sourced projects versus taking power off of Grain Belt? They have an IRP process that they go through. So we're certainly engaged in that process in Missouri, talking to them about how we think the project could fit into their plans for decarbonization, which I think we heard is something that the Missouri utilities are thinking very seriously about. Aside from that, of course, we have to coordinate with them anytime our facilities cross from a construction standpoint, but that would probably be about it in terms of coordination.
Okay. The studies that you mentioned, are they available online?
Yes, they are. The PA study is available on our website. The study regarding the economic impacts, we don't know that that's been posted to our website yet, although I'm certain it will be. The preliminary study that assessed the economic impact of the project prior to the expanded delivery, that's posted on the Commission's website, and that's publicly available.
On the Commission's website. Okay. And do these studies include models and that type of stuff?
Yes. So the PA study, I think that's posted to the website right now, is just a general overview, although we'd certainly be glad to speak with folks about the detailed study, which we obviously would file if we were to move forward with this at any commission that we're assessing those economic impacts as a part of a CCN or CCN amendment. Sorry, what was the question there, Josh? If there are detailed studies?
They were just wondering, I think if I read the question right, if there were models and not just the end answer, but the models also included.
Yeah, and then for the economic impact study, I know that strategic economics used InPlan. So that's a pretty standard economic impact analysis tool that folks use to assess the economic impact of large infrastructure projects.
Okay. Well, Nicole, it's great to see an opportunity. You know, the expansion, more delivery to Missouri is always good. Always good to see the connection with Missouri companies. And as Director Dixon mentioned, our interest in expanding broadband and serving that, and you willing and to play a role in that. So thank you very much for coming today. A lot of good, interesting, new information. So thank you again. I appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks again for the opportunity, Josh.
Absolutely. Our next and last session is a result of many of you are aware that Missouri passed and approved medical marijuana, and with that comes significant requirements that the marijuana cannabis be produced in Missouri. So there's a variety of different players involved, from growers and manufacturers to the dispensers. And for those of you who are not aware, cannabis can require a lot from the energy demand that it has, especially on the grow site. So what we thought we'd do is have a session that talks about the intersection between cannabis, its industry, its manufacturing, energy, and economic development. I'm really excited to bring this first of its kind session, Missouri-based, to you. We have Molly Graham from the Midwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, and Derek Smith from Resources Innovation Institute, and Lauren Gakowski from Energy Advisor at Franklin Energy. Sorry, Lauren, if I messed up your name there. First up is going to be Molly from MIA. Molly, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here, Josh. Can you hear me?
I hear you and I see you. You are good to go.
Great. Well, I will take it away. Thank you, Josh. As Josh mentioned, my name is Molly Graham. I am the Programs Director at the Midwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, or MIA. You can go on to the next slide. If you're not familiar with MIA, we are a membership-based organization that operates in 13 states here in the Midwest, with our office headquartered in Chicago. We have about 160 members right now, and they kind of span everyone who works on energy efficiency or touches energy efficiency here in the Midwest. We've got utilities, research institutions, program implementation companies. Really, anyone who's involved in energy efficiency is likely somehow involved with MIA. And we really see our role in the Midwest as an advocate and an educator for energy efficiency policies, and also as a vehicle for helping to implement cost-effective solutions. Next slide, please. So I thought I'd start off today just by covering a little bit of what the cannabis market looks like here in the Midwest and MIA's footprint. So I will note that this map has not been updated since the election that happened here a few weeks ago, but we've got 2 states here in the Midwest that have passed recreational cannabis use, with South Dakota just being the most recent one that passed recreational and medicinal cannabis use as a ballot measure in November. I believe they were the first state in the nation to legalize medicinal and recreational use at the exact same time. So they made a little bit of history a few weeks ago. And if you're not familiar with the cannabis industry, when we say recreational use, that means any adult can use cannabis or consume cannabis, much like we regulate alcohol. Medicinal just means patients with qualifying medical conditions can receive a medical card to purchase cannabis. As Josh alluded to, because cannabis is illegal at the federal level, the cannabis if it's legal to consume in a state, that means it also has to be grown in that state, since you can't cross state lines with a federally illegal substance. So that's why I'm talking a little bit about where it's legal to consume in the Midwest, because that also means where growing cannabis is actually happening. Next slide, please. So here in Missouri, just a quick timeline on how medical cannabis was approved. In 2014, cannabis was decriminalized. And then in 2018, it was actually included as a ballot measure that passed. And so Amendment 2 was, as it's been referred to, legalized medicinal use in the state of Missouri. And then in 2020 is when sales of that medical product actually began. There's usually a little bit of a lag time between legislation passing, actual cannabis products hitting the market. So the first sales of medicinal cannabis actually began just 2 months ago in Missouri. Next slide, please. After Amendment 2 was passed at the state level, the state commissioned a market impact study or market demand study to be conducted. The University of Missouri actually conducted this on behalf of the state to understand what some of the anticipated impacts and demand for legal cannabis could be. And so the study estimated that by 2022, the state would have approximately 26,000 approved patients or consumers of medical cannabis, assuming that it would kind of take a slow, steady, increased approach as soon as applications were open for approval. They also estimated that about 5,000 to 15,000 pounds of cannabis flower would be needed to meet the demand of consumers. I will note, though, that we've seen in other states who have done similar market demand studies before legislation has gone into place that they're likely underestimated. We've seen Colorado and Illinois did market demand studies that were significantly underestimated at the outset of their legal market. And so we could see the actual production of cannabis in Missouri exceeding some of these levels. Next slide, please. So before we get into the kind of the energy impacts of this new market, I think it's important to understand both the size and the scale of what this is going to look like here in Missouri. So the oversight agency of the cannabis industry is the State Health and Senior Services Department. They have decided to cap the number of cultivation facilities that they will give licenses to at 60. So right now there are 10 approved cultivation facilities that may be operational or just about to be operational in Missouri, and there's 50 applications that are still in process. Those 50 applications have been kind of pre-approved, and they're just going through the the rubber stamping process of getting them their license. So there will be 60 cultivation facilities across the state of Missouri. There will also be no more than 192 dispensaries. Those are the stores that sell the cannabis product. Similar to cultivators, 17 have been approved. They're likely operational or just about to be operational, and they have 175 still in process, but those have been pre-approved as well. I will note, though, that there have been several efforts to repeal the license caps that have been put in place. I know that there's a couple lawsuits. There was also a bill on the floor at the state legislature to repeal the caps that have been put in place. There have been some concerns that those that were awarded that pre-approval may have gotten some sort of special consideration through having connections with the oversight agency. So there's some corruption concerns. So we may see those caps lifted or changed, but that's where they stand right now. And as I mentioned before, in the initial demand study that was conducted, they anticipated about 26,000 patients consuming cannabis by 2022. Well, at the end of 2020, we have seen just under 23,000 patients get approval. So I think by the end of 2022, we'll likely be above the market demand's original estimate. And then I will note, just because it's important from an energy perspective, the legislation does allow patients to grow up to 6 plants at home. Patients must be granted a patient cultivation license, which will be different than just the card that they carry to purchase cannabis. So it should be easy to track at the state level how many patients are growing their own cannabis at home. I don't anticipate it to be a large amount. If you think about, for example, beer, you can brew your own beer at home, but many people don't because it's more convenient to go to the store and buy it. But there may be some people who choose to grow plants at home, and then from an energy perspective, we'll want to make sure that we are targeting those people with incentives to purchase energy efficient equipment to grow those plants. Next slide, please. So the state allows 3 different types of cannabis cultivation. You can grow indoors, which would be more of kind of a warehouse, fully enclosed type facility. And they've put a cap on the size of that facility at up to 30,000 square feet of flowering canopy. If you're not familiar with cannabis, the flower is kind of the last stage in the growing cycle. This is right before you harvest and process the product. And so it's not total canopy of plants, it's just plants in the flowering stage is capped at 30,000 square feet. Outdoor growing is also allowed, but you can only have up to 2,800 plants, individual plants. So it's not regulated based on the square footage, also in the flowering stage. And then there's the greenhouses, which, as you can imagine, is an indoor facility, but not as tight of an envelope as an actual indoor facility. You can have up to 2,800 flowering plants or 30,000 square feet of flowering canopy. I think they allow the grower to make that distinction of which one they would like to comply with. I'm only highlighting this because each type of growing will result in different energy impacts and energy needs. So it's important to understand what's on the table. Next slide, please. And then I thought I would just highlight a few other states in the Midwest for the sake of comparison to understand the scale of Missouri's program. So as I mentioned, Illinois and Michigan both have recreational programs. They are the largest medical producer or cannabis producers in the Midwest. So I highlighted Illinois and Missouri and Michigan here. Illinois is phasing out the licenses that they're awarding for cultivators. However, they have put a cap at 30 large cultivation facilities, and they define that as up to 210,000 square feet of plants in the flowering stage, which is significantly larger than Missouri's cap. And then 150 what are called craft grow facilities, so the smaller scale grow facilities. They can have up to 5,000 square feet of canopy, which they can apply for increases up to 14,000. So I'm only mentioning Illinois because it's important just to understand the scale of these facilities in Illinois versus Missouri. And overall, there will be less facilities in Missouri than there will be in Illinois. Next slide, please. I will mention that there are some energy requirements that were written into the legislation in Illinois that are very important to understand and have been getting a lot of attention lately because they're new, and Illinois is kind of the first state to write energy requirements within the legislation itself. So the legislation stipulates that cultivation facilities must meet a lighting power density of at least or no more than 36 watts per square foot, and heating and cooling must be achieved through either a high efficiency ductless split HVAC unit, variable refrigerant flow HVAC unit, or more energy efficient equipment. That has been drawing a lot of concerns and questions from cultivators on how they're going to meet those requirements. The intention of the energy piece of the legislation was to set kind of an efficiency baseline. However, this has been a little bit problematic and will likely be challenging to enforce. If anyone's familiar with ductless mini splits or VRF systems, they don't handle latent load very well, and cannabis cultivation facilities need to dehumidify a lot. They have very high dehumidification needs, and so neither one of those pieces of equipment will work very well in an indoor grow facility or an agricultural setting. So this is a little bit problematic. And then on the next slide, I'll highlight Michigan real quick. So Michigan legalized recreational cannabis in 2019. So they've been doing this for just about a year. Right now they have already over 400 cultivation licenses that have been awarded, which is a huge amount. They cap theirs, they have different classes that people can file for licenses under, and it's based on the total number of plants. So Michigan has a very large market in comparison to Illinois and Missouri. And finally, on the next slide, what are some of the energy impacts or energy considerations for this industry? The short answer is it's kind of hard to say. We don't have a ton of data on how these facilities use energy, especially data that's specific to the Midwest, which has a much different climate than some of the other states who have big cannabis markets like Oregon, California, Colorado, Massachusetts. But this isn't improving. There's ongoing reporting and benchmarking that these facilities are now taking part of to report their energy use, so we can kind of grow our data set and understand how energy is used at these facilities. But these facilities ultimately are going to impact load growth for utilities. Probably unanticipated load growth, since this is a brand new industry that I don't think anyone was expecting, which can negatively impact energy efficiency targets or climate goals. The city of Denver has reported that they've been seeing about 4% of their total electricity load dedicated to cannabis, and Oregon historically has seen some localized brownouts that they were able to tie directly to cannabis cultivation. So it's important to understand that these facilities could have a large impact on the electric grid. And then on my last slide, I just wanted to draw a few comparisons to how a few states are regulating the energy use or encouraging clean energy and energy conservation initiatives at the state level. So I highlighted Massachusetts. They have energy efficiency and conservation plans required in the application process to receive a cultivation license. They also have energy and water consumption reporting on an ongoing basis, so we can kind of monitor how these facilities are using energy. They also have prescriptive requirements on a lighting power density, similar to what I outlined in Illinois. Illinois, on the other hand, has an environmental plan included in the license application, but it's very vague in what that environmental plan needs to include. There's no template, and it's only worth a very small amount of points on the overall application scoring process, so it's not weighted very heavily. And then there's those prescriptive requirements in the legislation that I mentioned that are problematic. And because all of this was included in the legislation language, new legislation would need to pass in order to make any changes or amendments, which is challenging. And then finally, California, they have an ongoing stakeholder process to write their Title 24 requirements for indoor agriculture. This wouldn't be specific to cannabis. Title 24 is their state building energy codes. This has been a long process to gather input from various stakeholders and ensure that what is written can be implemented, and they would go into effect in January 2023. It's just a couple different options on the table on how people are considering incentivizing and requiring these facilities to consider clean energy or energy efficiency initiatives. So with that, I think the next slide is just my contact information. I'd be happy to answer any questions, but I will pass it on to Derek to talk more about the actual energy usage from these facilities.
Fantastic. Thank you, Molly.
All right, can everybody hear and see me? Okay.
Here we go. Yep, you're good, Derek.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Josh. Great presentation, Molly, as always. Welcome, everybody. It's really nice to be with you. I was actually born in St. Louis in St. John's and Creve Coeur, so it's a real pleasure to be in touch with my home state. I'm based in Portland, Oregon, and I'm executive director of Resource Innovation Institute, which is a nonprofit that's addressing the energy issues in this sector and beyond. Go ahead. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about us, just for context, and then I'm also going to spend a little bit of time sharing some tools and resources that we have for both utilities and governments to help them deal with these subjects. It's not to give a commercial on who we are and what we're doing. It's more to just let you know that there are a lot of free, good resources that can help you learn a lot and react to the market and plan for it. And there's very, very little information like that is peer reviewed and has the fingerprints on it from other governments and utilities who've been experiencing this market in their jurisdictions. Go ahead. So briefly, we are objective, we're data driven. We've been around for 5 years. We've got a lot of expertise in a lot of areas, including policy. We were founded by a energy advisor for 2 Oregon governors and folks who've worked on the LEED green building program on the board of the U.S. Green Building Council, as well as developing utility programs all over North America. So we've got a lot of expertise, and we're directing it toward this specific industry and even broader with controlled environment ag. Go ahead. So what we do is we essentially measure resource efficiency. The US DOE is not involved like it typically would be in this sector because of the federal illegality. So we're essentially filling that vacuum, and we've established the KPIs that measure energy and water efficiency. So we're helping governments and utilities understand benchmarks and work their way toward baselines. We're informing a bunch of different market actors on best practices, as I'll share with you in a minute. We are heavily involved in all the states that Molly just outlined that are dealing with policy and regulatory approaches. And ultimately, we're connecting the dots between a lot of standard setting organizations. And we're, at the end of the day, we're out after verification of what is most efficient, what's driving efficient production. And quite frankly, like Molly said, we just don't know enough yet. We have some good information, and we've got a lot more coming. So pretty excited about that. So in terms of resources that might be of use to you, go ahead, Josh. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. And just these are all the folks that we work with in all these different sectors. We just recently got an award notice from the USDA. So we will be taking everything we're learning in cannabis cultivation and applying it to the broader controlled environment ag market. So any crop grown anywhere in any greenhouse or warehouse, it will be addressing the resource efficiency associated with that. Go ahead. So the heartbeat of everybody that we interact with is our technical advisory council, and both Molly and Lauren are part of that. Thank you both for your expertise and contributions. We would welcome you all to consider joining this effort and learning in a network way on a lot of these subjects: HVAC, lighting, utility best practices, water policy, data, controls, and automation. A lot of subject matter that is relevant. Go ahead. One specific part of our technical advisory council that I want to mention, and that again both Molly and Lauren are involved in, is our utility working group. We invite anyone in the audience who wants to join as a utility or an implementation firm. That's the whole point. There's a lot to learn and a lot that people can learn from each other. So we just create the venues for that type of thing to happen. Go ahead. All right, so specifically in terms of tools and resources that might be useful to you, we have a resource benchmarking platform called the Cannabis Power Score. For cultivators, it provides facility performance benchmarking. For a utility, it would basically help you assess how your customer base is doing relative to other cultivators in other markets and within your market. It could help you assess benchmarks and baselines. And ultimately, we're serving Massachusetts on a compliance standpoint, and it might be relevant in Illinois soon, who has a reporting requirement. So essentially, cultivators in Massachusetts are fulfilling their state requirement to report their energy and water usage through the Power Score. And in those interactions where they're trying to just comply with the laws, we actually have the opportunity to have a moment with them to talk about benchmarking and the value of understanding and their energy footprint and how to be more efficient. So this tool is free for cultivators. It's free on the compliance side. There are some expenses associated with like a utility adopting it for program design, but it's all very accessible, and we're happy to serve. That's why it was created. Go ahead. We also produce a lot of publications. Most of these are free. We have the best practices guides that are tailored toward cultivators. Any of you can put these on your, you have to download them from our website, but you're welcome to push these out to your audiences. In Massachusetts, we did a state-specific best practices guide to help them deal with the specific energy regulations in that state. We could do that for Illinois as an example. But the HVAC and lighting ones are just amazing resources. 20 pages of dense recommendations on how to measure and work your way toward efficiency through usage of efficient technology and just sizing HVAC correctly, et cetera, et cetera. We have a utility primer that we will be pushing out to utilities, making available, that is really like detailed information on how to set up a program, how to interact with the laws that are, arriving in your state, and have, how to interact from a program standpoint with those laws, as well as a full overview of how various regulated markets are dealing with incentive programs and whatnot. So very valuable resource there. And if you just want detailed information about, how much energy is being used in these facilities, I would definitely direct you to the Cannabis Energy Report. And then if you want to become a member, we have detailed information beyond that. Go ahead. And the final thing I'll tell you about as a service that's available is, we're basically training the whole marketplace on how to be more efficient. It's not easy. And frankly, there's no blueprint for it. And every operation, as you will see, every cultivator is different. But there are basic learning elements that everybody should know. And so we have training programs directed at various audiences you see on the left, and examples of who we've been working with on the right. Okay. So next thing I wanted to offer, go ahead, Josh, is, I believe this is going to be, a research and recommendation. So I'm going to, as Molly said, I'm going to give you a quick overview of what we're finding through our research about how much energy is being used. I'll give you a few different scenarios of different markets and what they're, how they're impacted. And then I'll offer you a few recommendations on how to deal with this unique customer class. Go ahead. So in the West, we did some research with a firm called ERS, and this has been published in Cannabis Business Times. But essentially, what I'm showing you here is on your as you're reading the screen on your left, Figure 1 is greenhouses, and so you'll see a large amount of natural gas used there. This is from Boulder County in Colorado. On the right, you're looking at an indoor scenario, and with a lot less natural gas, and the lighting load is affecting is absorbing a lot of the load, I should say. So the way fuel sources and loads are distributed are basically a function of the utility mix, some cultivator preferences. Could be a construction timeline issue, like needing to get into cogen because of a hookup may take a while. So there's a varying degree of fuel sources and load distribution. Go ahead. This next slide, this should say in the East. This is data from Massachusetts. I apologize. Just a little bit of a different spin on what you saw before, but same basic message. I would recommend strategically you interact with the audience based on your energy goals, and there's a lot of different ways you can approach it. Go ahead. So now getting into actual, like, how much energy is being used, you can see there's a distribution of between 2 million kilowatt hours a year to 6+ million kilowatt hours a year, depending on the size of the operation. And even within sizes, there can be quite a bit of a range, if it is an efficient facility or not. Efficiency can mean a 40 to 50% reduction in overall energy usage from a standard, inefficient baseline. One specific anecdote there in Nevada, down below, roughly 2 million kilowatt hours a year for 4,200 square feet. So you can start of flowering canopy. So you can start to do the math based on what Molly was talking about as it relates to number of licenses and license size, et cetera. And then I'm going to get into a few recommendations here. So just to put you in the mind of a cultivator, why are they using all this energy? why are they doing agriculture inside buildings? You know, there's a lot of different reasons, but basically some of it is a function of this being an illegal market for some time, and just the mentality of hiding has resulted in working indoors and finding comfort there and finding value there. In some jurisdictions, it's required that facilities cultivate indoors because there's a jurisdictional concern about smell or visibility or safety or something to that effect. Indoor also can truly impact quality and you know, can improve the reliability of the crop to survive because of all the weather variations that we're dealing with nowadays. So we can go into more detail on any of that, but that's just to give you some background and again, put you a little bit in the mind of the cultivator. So on the next slide, you know, final recommendations here. You should really know that this is a sector of the economy that thinks they're doing good things. They think they're promoting public health. They think that they're pushing social equity because, you know, historically cannabis has been used to subjugate Black and brown people. And, you know, the more as these markets become legal and business opportunities are available, you know, it can be used as a really effective tool to right the wrongs of the war on drugs. So a consideration there. Just don't treat them like criminals. Treat them like an important economic sector, which they are. You know, tax revenues are above $1 billion in multiple states now. Oregon just hit that mark. Washington and Colorado have hit that mark a while back. So be a business partner, understand where they're coming from, understand what their objectives are, and make that connection between governments and utilities and really help them succeed. I really want you all to think about the market of today as being different than the market, say, 2 or 4 years from now, when there will be federal legalization. I think it's pretty clear. Everybody feels like that is around the corner, whatever your definition of that may be. And so right now you're going to have a captured market. You're going to have the ability to build infrastructure and collect a lot of tax revenues. But in 2 years, if you've set up infrastructure and a whole cultivation market that is inefficient or is lacking in quality, you know, you're going to lose them. You're going to have mothballed facilities, and your dispensaries will be filled with Oregon weed. But in the meantime, you have the opportunity to create an efficient, quality cultivation community that is producing long-term tax revenues only if they are going to be efficient. So think about that. Don't just sit idly by and wait for them to ask you about efficiency. Be engaged, and for your own good, for your own tax revenue long-term. And just as you do that, recognize that efficiency may not be their highest priority right out of the gate. They're focused on market share, getting investor returns. And so you really need to time your conversation about conservation and hookup effectively, and just, get these folks wired to be long-term partners to the state. I think that is the bulk of what I was going to talk about. Yeah. So we're happy to help. That's literally why we exist. Please give us a call. We're thrilled to serve. Take care.
Thank you so much, Derek. Next up, Lauren.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Thanks, Derek and Molly, for the good introduction there. Again, my name is Lauren Gaikowski. I'm an energy advisor with Franklin Energy. I work specifically on ComEd's agricultural energy efficiency program, and I help develop our Cannabis Express program, if you will, that's specific to our recreational and medical cultivators in the state. So today we'll just go over some different energy efficiency opportunities in the indoor agriculture sector, specific to cannabis. Give you some case studies that we've seen across the Midwest, and wrap it up from there. So next slide, please. So obvious opportunity that we see most people going after is LED grow lights. Typical energy savings that we can see is about a 30 to 40% reduction in energy usage compared to traditional legacy lighting. Like Molly said, most folks in the flowering stage are going to use 1,000-watt HPS fixtures in a more traditional setting, less efficient, if you will. So, significant energy savings that you can see there. And not only that, but it's the interactive savings that you can get on the cooling side is pretty significant as well. Like Molly and Derek both said, these facilities have really high sensible and latent loads. The sensible is, honestly, it's driven specifically because of the lighting that we have to have in order to mimic a natural environment, and then transpiration from the plants. So, almost all of the water that you give a plant is going to be evaporated into the air, and that needs to be removed in order to prevent mold and mildew. So you can imagine, the energy loads on these facilities are just incredible. But back to LED grow lights. Lifespans on fixtures are roughly around 50,000 hours, which is drastically higher than what we see with traditional HID fixtures. Most cultivators, after each harvest, they're going to switch out the the HID bulbs in their 1,000-watt HPS fixtures. So, 3 to 4 harvests a year, that's a lot of maintenance time that has now been avoided. One thing that I like to recommend to folks is look for fixtures that have a high PPE value. PPE, this stands for photosynthetic photon efficacy. It's essentially a measurement of how efficiently the fixture is converting watt energy into PAR radiation. There's a lot of acronyms with horticultural lighting. So, like Derek was saying, be a partner to these cultivators. Also understand the different metrics and the different scientific lingo that goes with these facilities, watts, foot candles, illumination, throw all of that out the window. You have to get on board with PAR, with photons, things of that nature. So back to PPE, the DLC actually does have a horticultural QPL. They're increasing their baseline PPE requirement for next year, and it's going to be 2.2 micromoles per joule. And that's also a requirement for a lot of states that are putting in energy efficiency regulations. Illinois, for example, has either a 36 watts per square foot requirement, or fixtures have to be DLC listed and have a PPE greater than 2.2 micromoles per joule. So something to definitely be aware of. Next slide there, Josh. So I wanted to give just a quick overview of what some potential incentives and actual kWh savings are going to look like for LED grow lighting. This example is actually coming to us from a cultivator in Michigan in the consumer's energy territory. The reason for this is just because in Illinois, with the energy efficiency code requirements, it was not going to be a true apples to apples comparison. So this is comparing 1,000 watt and 600 watt HID lighting in the baseline scenario. This is a new construction project. You can see in the flowering room, this customer installed 336 630 watt LED grow lights, just over 100 fixtures in the vegetative room. Just so everyone knows, vegetative stage, this is kind of where you're growing the plant taller and bushier so that it can support the weight of the buds. And then seedling rooms, this is where you're taking cutlings from a mother plant and starting a brand new plant. In this scenario, we assume 12-hour photo periods in the flowering stages and then 18-hour photo periods in the vegetative and seedling rooms. And the numbers speak for themselves, right? I mean, 1.7 million kWh saved, almost $200,000 savings a year. Incentive for this customer was $279,000 with a payback of just over a year. So pretty great opportunity for this customer. Incentives in ComEd territory are really great for LED grow lighting. So, I guess take examples of what other utilities have done and run with it in Missouri. Next slide there. So HVAC and dehumidification equipment. This is kind of, it's hard to give a quick 5-minute presentation on HVAC equipment just because there are so many different ways that you can set up your HVAC equipment for these facilities. But one thing that we've kind of seen in the Illinois market, at least, is this push towards a more industry-specific HVAC and dehumidification equipment. And what I mean by that is traditionally what we see is we've got separate equipment that will handle the sensible load, separate equipment that will handle the dehumidification load, and then maybe some sort of reheat system thrown in there. I know a couple of customers that I work with, they've just got freehanding electric heaters throughout their grow space. And, all of those systems just fight each other constantly. So we've seen a lot of folks deciding to move towards these all-in-one systems where they can cool, dehumidify, do any sort of necessary reheat with one piece of equipment. And there's significant energy savings to be had there. Another thing that we've seen is folks moving towards a more specialized dehumidification system. Again, this is dehumidifiers that are tailored specifically to cultivation spaces, rather than just relying on your cooling system to remove a certain percentage of latent heat and then having portable dehumidifiers that you purchase from Home Depot scattered throughout the grow space. And then this last one is more of a operational saving. Traditionally, we see cultivators grow at really low temperatures and relative humidity. I'm thinking like 65 degrees Fahrenheit and then 50% RH, which is really hard on the HVAC and dehumidification system. So if we can have cultivators, grow at a range of 75 to 80 degrees and then potentially 60 to 65% RH, that's fantastic operational savings with no CapEx expense. So next slide. So this is a hypothetical energy savings example. Illinois has not issued any craft grow licenses yet, so I can't give you an actual case study. But this is a calculation that we've done for a couple different growers. So let's say we've got a craft grower that's got 35,000 or 3,500 square feet of cultivation space in the flowering stage. And we actually compared for energy savings calculations, this proposed all-in-one HVAC piece of equipment to a ductless mini split with standalone dehumidification. And this is actually, well, Molly talked about it before, but because of the Illinois code legislation. So what we did is we modeled the base case with the ductless mini split and the standalone to the proposed and calculated energy savings. And you can see here just about 265,000 kWh saved a year. For our ComEd program, we pay out incentives for custom projects, which is this one is, at 12 cents per kilowatt hour saved. So you can see they're getting just under $32,000 back as a utility incentive. Next slide. So just to wrap it up, some other opportunities that we've seen customers looking at in the past and have suggested to folks, lighting controls. So this is kind of a newer opportunity that we've seen folks, and I know the DLC is potentially looking at this as a separate piece of their horticultural QPL, but if we can have cultivators kind of mimic a natural sunrise and sunset versus this, just all of the flower rooms turn on, go to 100% of output, and then immediately turn off after 12 hours. Not only is this going to help in energy savings on the lighting side, but it can also, if we can ease the HVAC system into that sensible load, that's that's less work on the HVAC system. Another opportunity, and I know RII is looking at putting out a best practices guide for controls next year, but looking at sophisticated HVAC controls, the systems where we're going to have really tight environmental controls, and then you can tie that to your HVAC system. So there's not a whole lot of fluctuation between temperature and relative humidity. These plants, when you put them indoors, are really, really finicky, and they need, just a couple of degrees temperature ranges. So making sure that stays relatively homogeneous. One thing about controls is just making sure that you place the sensors within the plant canopy and they're not spaced, off on the walls where, temperature and relative humidity is not exact as it would be within the plant canopy. Jumping back to LED grow lighting, there are two new kind of market sectors that are emerging within this space, and that is externally driven and actively cooled LEDs. So externally driven, as the name implies, this is an LED fixture where there's no driver and there's a centralized power supply. These fixtures are not listed on the DLC's website as of yet. That's going to be a subcategory starting in 2021. And then actively cooled LEDs, this is where you have a refrigeration system that pulls all of the sensible load off of the fixtures and then expels that to an exhaust system, or potentially uses it for some sort of process. So, you not only get the added benefit of having a reduced wattage LED, you're also not rejecting that heat into your cultivation space. And now you're potentially using it for some sort of, reheat process or domestic hot water, wherever you need that heat for. So kind of a triple whammy there. And then last but not least, I wanted to give a quick example of a demand side management opportunity, and that is what we call flower room shifting. So rather than have all of the flower rooms turn on from, let's say 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. and have this really high peak load turn on, potentially shifting those flower rooms. So, maybe staggering them. One room turns on every 4 hours, or doing kind of a split system where, flower rooms A through F are on from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. and then flower rooms G through L are on in that off period. So you can really cut your demand almost in half by doing that. Next slide. So that's it for me. If anyone has any questions, comments, concerns, my contact information is here. Please feel free to reach out. We'd love to talk about energy efficiency in these spaces with you. So thank you.
Thank you, Lauren, very much. Definitely a lot of new stuff we have to think about here in Missouri. I know I've had conversations with our utilities about the additional load, and for a state that doesn't see a lot of load growth, it'll make a difference, but making sure we do it in a smart way, I think is really important, which you all pointed out. There is a question up right now from Donna Clark, and that is efficient light spectrum diodes. Example, purple or red diodes, question mark. I think that could be for anyone. Anyone understand that question?
Lauren, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I sure can. So efficient spectrum, I guess the best way to, well, we're going to get technical, folks. I'm sorry.
Yeah, exactly.
But how we measure light output in horticultural lighting is we look at it from the PAR spectrum, which is the electromagnetic spectrum, and that's the visible light that we can see. It's 400 to 700 nanometers. Traditional lighting, 1000-watt HPS fixtures, they'll have a really high output in the far red to red output, with little in the blues to greens and everything in between. LEDs these days are a really balanced output and really mimic or try to at least mimic the light output that you would see from the sun. So you get a really balanced photosynthetic output from those fixtures. So it's not necessarily just doing, blues and purples or purple LED, right? We see a lot of folks doing these more white light spectra, but there's still the full PAR range in that fixture. Does that make sense? Derek, Molly, do you have anything to add?
Well, just spectra is a, that's a cultivator consideration, and there's different quality attributes that they may be seeking. It's not a simple answer. Look at fixture efficacy and understand your cultivator and what they're trying to get, what their objectives are, and there will be an answer somewhere in there.
Part of energy efficiency is also financing. Derek, you had mentioned to make sure that you get to the client at the right time. I was talking to a colleague the other day, and they made a comment of a widget maker doesn't get into making widgets and thinking about energy, right? They're thinking about selling their widgets, and energy is a second or third thing. So have to understand that and respect that part. But I do understand, am I right to suggest that financing the development of these structures and the programs is not an easy task, and is an issue that some of these companies are looking for financing when they are trying to just build their grow house?
Yeah, there's no federal backstop, so lenders are, not willing to lend, and a lot of times in the the build of the capital stack, they're not the executives or the cultivators are not thinking about efficiency. They're just thinking about what they did in the illicit market. And so they get the CapEx, sideways in terms of being aligned with efficiency. So there's sort of part of it is like teaching the efficiency value, and then there's finding financing sources that could help them address the CapEx. Could be PACE, could be all kinds of other, state level, full faith and credit type of enhancements that y'all could throw in the mix. I don't know what your tools look like in that regard, but ideally you've got, some tool that could apply that you could help invest in this sector and invest in its efficiency so that, again, long-term tax revenue are going to be much more likely if you've got a producer class that knows how to compete once the state walls come down.
Right. Well, I found out last week that the first, there was a first, and that was a cannabis project funded by PACE, Property Assessed Clean Energy. It was the first one in the country. I know that MEI operates the Show Me PACE Clean Energy District and have been in conversations with a variety of different developers on this particular topic, and hope to support that as well as we go forward. But it seems as if it's done first elsewhere. I haven't found that they were been a little coy about the location exactly, but it really comes down to one or two places. It's either Ohio or Michigan, I think, but maybe I'm wrong. As far as PACE goes. Yeah. So I mean, that's an option for folks that are in this industry, is if you're looking for alternative financing to go to those more expensive, but as Lauren pointed out, more effective units, and save that energy with the upfront investment. Possibly PACE is a way to address that. Molly and Lauren, do you see, you have PACE in the Chicago area and the surrounding. Do you think that it will be utilized there in Illinois?
It's hard to say, just because we only have 20 operational cultivation facilities in the state of Illinois right now. There have been some issues with the next wave of licenses due to the pandemic. There was an executive order issued to delay the further issuance of more licenses. So it's hard to say. I don't think there's been much of a connection made to applicants who are seeking a cultivation license and potential financing mechanisms. I will also mention, Derek kind of touched on this, that this market is highly, highly competitive. And in a place like Illinois, where there's limited licenses being released in stages, there's really going to be a rush to kind of be the first on the market and get your product out there. And cannabis kind of takes a little while once you get your license approved to have your crops ready for harvest and then start actually selling products in stores. So that there's really going to be a rush to fill these facilities with equipment, likely not the most energy efficient option, just in order to get plants in the building and start making sales, because that timeline between license approval and actually making a profit is kind of a longer window. So I don't foresee energy efficiency being a huge consideration at the outset of these facility designs. I hope that it will be, and we've been trying to educate stakeholders that the time to engage these facilities is now, before they're built out, before plants are in the building. But it's a challenge with this market that's just incredibly competitive and has a lot on the line. Their crop is worth millions of dollars. There's a lot of investors that are pouring money into the Illinois market. So there's a lot going on.
All right. Well, I don't see any other questions. It's definitely new in Missouri. Hopefully we find some good leaders out there. I know there are several applicants wanted to, be zero carbon impact as far as their development. So it'll be really interesting to see how those facilities come about, and how efficiency and solar plays into it. But I thank you all very much for participating and sharing this information with us. And I look forward to working with you all as this industry grows in Missouri.
Thank you, Josh. I'll just say that there's 2 cultivators that are opening in St. Louis that we're in touch with pretty regularly, and I'm happy to make connections as useful.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you, Molly. Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you all. Have a good day.
Well, everyone, that concludes our economic development and infrastructure Midwest Energy Policy Series, all of our events for this year. Greatly appreciate your patience. Obviously could not get this done without great staff like Travis or sponsors, Evergy, Polsinelli, Ameren, Liberty Utilities, Spire, Missourians for a Balanced Energy Future, and our media partners in RTO, Insider, and Clean Energy Pipeline. It is our intent to continue the series in 2021. It is very likely that our April 1 on infrastructure will be virtual as well. The energy efficiency and economic development series for next year are to be determined, but those are August and December. But do look for more stuff coming out on energy efficiency around PACE, as well as the the infrastructure series in April. Thank you all very much. Have a great week. Stay safe and have a great holiday. Merry Christmas.